Brother and sister. Brother took sister by the hand and said, "Look here, we haven't had one single happy hour since our mother died. That stepmother of ours beats us regularly every day, and if we dare go near her, she kicks us away. We never get anything but hard, dry crusts to eat. Why, the dog under the table is better off than we are. She does throw him a good morsel or two now and then. Oh dear, if our own dear mother only knew all about it. Come along, and let us go forth into the wide world together." So off they started through fields and meadows, over hedges and ditches, and walked the whole day long. And when it rained, sister said, "Heaven, and our hearts are weeping together." Towards evening they came to a large forest, and were so tired out with hunger and their long walk, as well as all their trouble, that they crept into a hollow tree and soon fell fast asleep. Next morning, when they woke up, the sun was already high in the heavens, and was shining down bright and warm into the tree. Then said brother, "I'm so thirsty, sister. If I did but know where to find a little stream, I'd go and have a drink. I do believe I hear one." He jumped up, took sister by the hand, and they set off to hunt for the brook. Now, their cruel stepmother was in reality a witch, and she knew perfectly well that the two children had run away. She had crept secretly after them, and had cast her spells over all the streams in the forest. Presently the children found a little brook, dancing and glittering over the stones, and brother was eager to drink of it. But as it rushed past, sister heard it murmuring, "Who drinks of me will be a tiger. Who drinks of me will be a tiger." So she cried out, "Oh, dear brother, pray don't drink, or you'll be turned into a wild beast and tear me to pieces." Brother was dreadfully thirsty, but he did not drink. "Very well," said he, "I'll wait till we come to the next spring." When they came to the second brook, sister heard it repeating too, "Who drinks of me will be a wolf. Who drinks of me will be a wolf." And she cried, "Oh, brother, pray don't drink here either, or you'll be turned into a wolf and eat me up." Again brother did not drink, but he said, "Well, I'll wait a little longer till we reach the next stream, but then, whatever you may say, I really must drink, for I can bear this thirst no longer." And when they got to the third brook, sister heard it say as it rushed past, "Who drinks of me will be a roe. Who drinks of me will be a roe." And she begged, "Ah, brother, don't drink yet, or you'll become a roe and run away from me." But her brother was already kneeling by the brook and bending over it to drink, and, sure enough, no sooner had his lips touched the water than he fell on the grass, transformed into a little roebuck. Sister cried bitterly over her poor bewitched brother, and the little roe wept too, and sat sadly by her side. At last the girl said, "Never mind, dear little fawn, I will never forsake you." And she took off her golden garter and tied it round the roe's neck. Then she plucked rushes and plaited a soft cord of them, which she fastened to the collar. When she had done this, she led the roe farther and farther, right into the depths of the forest. After they had gone a long, long way, they came to a little house, and when the girl looked into it, she found it was quite empty, and she thought, "Perhaps we might stay and live here." So she hunted up leaves and moss to make a soft bed for the little roe, and every morning and evening she went out and gathered roots, nuts, and berries for herself, and tender young grass for the fawn. And he fed from her hand, and played round her, and seemed quite happy. In the evening, when sister was tired, she said her prayers, and then laid her head on the fawn's back and fell sound asleep with it as a pillow. And if brother had but kept his natural form, really it would have been a most delightful kind of life. They had been living for some time in the forest in this way, when it came to pass that the king of that country had a great hunt through the woods. Then the whole forest rang with such a blowing of horns, baying of dogs, and joyful cries of huntsmen, that the little roe heard it and longed to join in too. "Ah," said he to sister, "do let me go off to the hunt. I can't keep still any longer." And he begged and prayed till at last she consented. "But," said she, "mind you come back in the evening. I shall lock my door fast, for fear of those wild huntsmen. So, to make sure of my knowing you, knock at the door and say, 'My sister dear, open, I'm here.' If you don't speak, I shan't open the door." So off sprang the little roe, and he felt quite well and happy in the free open air. The king and his huntsmen soon saw the beautiful creature and started in pursuit, but they could not come up with it, and whenever they thought they were sure to catch it, it bounded off to one side into the bushes and disappeared. When night came on, it ran home, and knocking at the door of the little house cried, "My sister dear, open, I'm here." The door opened, and he ran in and rested all night on his soft mossy bed. Next morning the hunt began again, and as soon as the little roe heard the horns and the ho, ho of the huntsman, he could not rest another moment, and said, "Sister, open the door, I must get out." So sister opened the door and said, "Now mind, and get back by nightfall, and say your little rhyme." As soon as the king and his huntsmen saw the roe with the golden collar, they all rode off after it, but it was far too quick and nimble for them. This went on all day, but as evening came on, the huntsmen had gradually encircled the roe, and one of them wounded it slightly in the foot, so that it limped and ran off slowly. Then the huntsman stole after it as far as the little house, and heard it call out, "My sister dear, open, I'm here." And he saw the door open and close immediately. The fawn had run in. The huntsman remembered all this carefully, and went off straight to the king, and told him all he had seen and heard. "Tomorrow we will hunt again," said the king. Poor sister was terribly frightened when she saw how her little fawn had been wounded. She washed off the blood, bound up the injured foot with herbs, and said, "Now, dear, go and lie down and rest, so that your wound may heal." The wound was really so slight that it was quite well next day, and the little roe did not feel it at all. No sooner did it hear the sounds of hunting in the forest than it cried, "I can't stand this. I must be there too. I'll take care they shan't catch me." Sister began to cry and said, "They are certain to kill you, and then I shall be left all alone in the forest and forsaken by everyone. I can't and won't let you out." "Then I shall die of grief," replied the roe, "for when I hear that horn, I feel as if I must jump right out of my skin." So at last, when sister found there was nothing else to be done, she opened the door with a heavy heart, and the roe darted forth full of glee and health into the forest. As soon as the king saw the roe, he said to his huntsman, "Now then, give chase to it all day till evening, but mind and be careful not to hurt it." When the sun had set, the king said to his huntsman, "Now come and show me the little house in the wood." And when he got to the house, he knocked at the door and said, "My sister dear, open, I'm here." Then the door opened, and the king walked in, and there stood the loveliest maiden he had ever seen. The girl was much startled when instead of the little roe, she expected she saw a man with a gold crown on his head walk in. But the king looked kindly at her, held out his hand, and said, "Will you come with me to my castle and be my dear wife?" "Oh, yes," replied the maiden, "but you must let my roe come too. I could not possibly forsake it. It shall stay with you as long as you live, and shall want for nothing," the king promised. In the meantime the roe came bounding in, and sister tied the rush cord once more to its collar, took the end in her hand, and so they left the little house in the forest together. The king lifted the lonely maiden onto his horse and led her to his castle, where the wedding was celebrated with the greatest splendor. The roe was petted and caressed and ran about at will in the palace gardens. Now all this time the wicked stepmother, who had been the cause of these poor children's misfortunes and trying adventures, was feeling fully persuaded that sister had been torn to pieces by wild beasts and brother shot to death in the shape of a roe. When she heard how happy and prosperous they were, her heart was filled with envy and hatred, and she could think of nothing but how to bring some fresh misfortune on them. Her own daughter, who was as hideous as night and had only one eye, reproached her by saying, "It is I who ought to have had this good luck and been queen." "Be quiet, will you?" said the old woman. "When the time comes, I shall be at hand." Now after some time it happened one day, when the king was out hunting, that the queen gave birth to a beautiful little boy. The old witch thought here was a good chance for her, so she took the form of the lady-in-waiting, and, hurrying into the room where the queen lay in her bed, called out, "The bath is quite ready. It will help to make you strong again. Come, let us be quick, for fear the water should get cold." Her daughter was at hand too, and between them they carried the queen, who was still very weak, into the bathroom and laid her in the bath. Then they locked the door and ran away. They took care beforehand to make a blazing hot fire under the bath, so that the lovely young queen might be suffocated. As soon as they were sure this was the case, the old witch tied a cap on her daughter's head and laid her in the queen's bed. She managed, too, to make her figure and general appearance look like the queen's, but even her power could not restore the eye she had lost, so she made her lie on the side of the missing eye in order to prevent the king's noticing anything. In the evening, when the king came home and heard the news of his son's birth, he was full of delight, and insisted on going at once to his dear wife's bedside to see how she was getting on. But the old witch cried out, "Take care and keep the curtains drawn. Don't let the light get into the queen's eyes. She must be kept perfectly quiet." So the king went away and never knew that it was a false queen who lay in the bed. When midnight came and everyone in the palace was sound asleep, the nurse, who alone watched by the baby's cradle in the nursery, saw the door open gently, and who should come in but the real queen. She lifted the child from its cradle, laid it on her arm, and nursed it for some time. Then she carefully shook up the pillows of the little bed, laid the baby down, and tucked the coverlet in all round him. She did not forget the little roe either, but went to the corner where it lay and gently stroked its back. Then she silently left the room, and next morning when the nurse asked the sentries if they had seen anyone go into the castle that night, they all said, "No, we saw no one at all." For many nights the queen came in the same way, but she never spoke a word, and the nurse was too frightened to say anything about her visits. After some little time had elapsed, the queen spoke one night and said, "Is my child well? Is my roe well? I'll come back twice and then farewell." The nurse made no answer, but as soon as the queen had disappeared, she went to the king and told him all. The king exclaimed, "Good heavens! What do you say? I will watch myself tonight by the child's bed." When the evening came, he went to the nursery, and at midnight the queen appeared and said, "Is my child well? Is my roe well? I'll come back once, and then farewell." And she nursed and petted the child as usual before she disappeared. The king dared not trust himself to speak to her, but the following night he kept watch again. That night when the queen came, she said, "Is my child well? Is my roe well? I've come this once, and now farewell." Then the king could restrain himself no longer, but sprang to her side and cried, "You can be no one but my dear wife." "Yes," said she, "I am your dear wife." and in the same moment she was restored to life, and was as fresh and well and rosy as ever. Then she told the king all the cruel things the wicked witch and her daughter had done. The king had them both arrested at once and brought to trial, and they were condemned to death. The daughter was led into the forest, where the wild beasts tore her to pieces, and the old witch was burnt at the stake. As soon as she reduced to ashes, the spell was taken off the little roe, and he was restored to his natural shape once more. And so brother and sister lived happily ever after. Pushibride. There was once on a time a widower who had a son and a daughter by his first wife. They were both good children, and loved each other with all their hearts. After some time had gone by, the man married again, and he chose a widow with one daughter who was ugly and wicked, and her mother was ugly and wicked too. From the very day that the new wife came into the house, there was no peace for the man's children, and not a corner to be found where they could get any rest. So the boy thought that the best thing he could do was to go out into the world and try to earn his own bread. When he had roamed about for some time, he came to the king's palace, where he obtained a place under the coachman, and very brisk and active he was, and the horses that he looked after were so fat and sleek that they shone again. But his sister, who was still at home, fared worse and worse. Both her stepmother and her stepsister were always finding fault with her, whatsoever she did and whithersoever she went, and they scolded her and abused her so that she never had an hour's peace. They made her do all the hard work, and hard words fell to her lot early and late, but little enough food accompanied them. One day they sent her to the brook to fetch some water home, and an ugly and horrible head rose up out of the water and said, "Wash me, girl." "Yes, I will wash you with pleasure," said the girl, and began to wash and scrub the ugly face, but she couldn't help thinking that it was a very unpleasant piece of work. When she had done it, and done it well, another head rose up out of the water, and this one was uglier still. "Brush me, girl," said the head. "Yes, I will brush you with pleasure," said the girl, and set to work with the tangled hair, and, as may be easily imagined, this too was by no means pleasant work. When she had got it done, another and a much more ugly and horrible-looking head rose up out of the water. "Kiss me, girl," said the head. "Yes, I will kiss you," said the man's daughter. And she did it, but she thought it was the worst bit of work that she had ever had to do in her life. So the heads all began to talk to each other and to ask what they should do for this girl who was so full of kindliness. "She shall be the prettiest girl that ever was, and fair and bright as the day," said the first head. "Gold shall drop from her hair whenever she brushes it," said the second. "Gold shall drop from her mouth whenever she speaks," said the third head. So when the man's daughter went home, looking as beautiful and bright as day, the stepmother and her daughter grew much more ill-tempered, and it was worse still when she began to talk, and they saw that golden coins dropped from her mouth. The stepmother fell into such a towering passion that she drove the man's daughter into the pigsty. She might stay there with her fine show of gold, the stepmother said, but she should not be permitted to set foot in the house. It was not long before the mother wanted her own daughter to go to the stream to fetch some water. When she got there with her pails, the first head rose up out of the water close to the bank. "Wash me, girl," it said. "Wash yourself," answered the woman's daughter. Then the second head appeared. "Brush me, girl," said the head. "Brush yourself," said the woman's daughter. So down it went to the bottom, and the third head came up. "Kiss me." "Girl," said the head. "As if I would kiss your ugly mouth," said the girl. So again the heads talked together about what they should do for this girl who was so ill-tempered and full of her own importance, and they agreed that she should have a nose that was 4 ells long, and a jaw that was 3 ells, and a fir bush in the middle of her forehead. And every time she spoke, ashes should fall from her mouth. When she came back to the cottage door with her pails, she called to her mother who was inside. "Open the door. Open the door yourself, my own dear child," said the mother. "I can't get near because of my nose," said the daughter. When the mother came and saw her, you may imagine what a state of mind she was in, and how she screamed and lamented. But neither the nose nor the jaw grew any the less for that. Now the brother, who was in service in the king's palace, had taken a portrait of his sister, and he had carried the picture away with him, and every morning and evening he knelt down before it and prayed for his sister, so dearly did he love her. The other stable boys had heard him doing this, so they peeped through the keyhole into his room, and saw that he was kneeling there before a picture. So they told everyone that every morning and evening the youth knelt down and prayed to an idol which he had, and at last they went to the king himself, and begged that he too would peep through the keyhole and see for himself what the youth did. At first the king would not believe this, but after a long, long time they prevailed with him, and he crept on tiptoe to the door, peeped through, and saw the youth on his knees, with his hands clasped together before a picture which was hanging on the wall. "Open the door!" cried the king. But the youth did not hear. So the king called to him again, but the youth was praying so fervently that he did not hear him this time either. "Open the door, I say!" cried the king again. "It is I want to come in." So the youth sprang to the door and unlocked it, but in his haste he forgot to hide the picture. When the king entered and saw it, he stood still as if he were in fetters, and could not stir from the spot, for the picture seemed to him so beautiful. "There is nowhere on earth so beautiful a woman as this," said the king. But the youth told him that she was his sister, and that he had painted her, and that if she was not prettier than the picture she was, at all events not uglier. "Well, if she is as beautiful as that, I will have her for my queen," said the king, and he commanded the youth to go home and fetch her without a moment's delay, and to lose no time in coming back. The youth promised to make all the haste he could, and set forth from the king's palace. When the brother arrived at home to fetch his sister, her stepmother and stepsister would go too. So they all set out together, and the man's daughter took with her a casket in which she kept her gold, and a dog which was called Little Snow. These 2 things were all that she had inherited from her mother. When they had travelled for some time, they had to cross the sea, and the brother sat down at the helm, and the mother and the 2 half-sisters went to the fore part of the vessel, and they sailed a long, long way. At last they came in sight of land. "Look at that white strand there. That is where we shall land," said the brother, pointing across the sea. "What is my brother saying?" inquired the man's daughter. "He says that you are to throw your casket out into the sea," answered the stepmother. "Well, if my brother says so, I must do it," said the man's daughter, and she flung her casket into the sea. When they had sailed for some time longer, the brother once more pointed over the sea. "There you may see the palace to which we are bound," said he. "What is my brother saying?" asked the man's daughter. "Now he says that you are to throw your dog into the sea," answered the stepmother. The man's daughter wept and was sorely troubled, for Little Snow was the dearest thing she had on earth, but at last she threw him overboard. "If my brother says that, I must do it. But heaven knows how unwilling I am to throw thee out, Little Snow," said she. So they sailed onwards a long way farther. "There mayst thou see the king coming out to meet thee," said the brother, pointing to the seashore. "What is my brother saying?" asked his sister again. "Now he says that you are to make haste and throw yourself overboard," answered the stepmother. She wept and she wailed. But as her brother had said that, she thought she must do it, so she leaped into the sea. But when they arrived at the palace, and the king beheld the ugly bride with a nose that was 4 ells long, a jaw that was 3 ells, and a forehead that had a bush in the middle of it, he was quite terrified. But the wedding feast was all prepared, as regarded brewing and baking, and all the wedding guests were sitting waiting, so, ugly as she was, the king was forced to take her. But he was very wroth, and none can blame him for that, so he caused the brother to be thrown into a pit full of snakes. On the first Thursday night after this, a beautiful maiden came into the kitchen of the palace, and begged the kitchen maid who slept there to lend her a brush. She begged very prettily and got it, and then she brushed her hair, and the gold dropped from it. A little dog was with her, and she said to it, "Go out, little Snow, and see if it will soon be day." This she said thrice, and the third time that she sent out the dog to see, it was very near dawn. Then she was forced to depart, but as she went she said, "Out on thee, ugly Pushibride, sleeping so soft by the young king's side. On sand and stones my bed I make, and my brother sleeps with the cold snake, unpitied and unwept. I shall come twice more, and then never again," said she. In the morning, the kitchen maid related what she had seen and heard, and the king said that next Thursday night he himself would watch in the kitchen and see if this were true. And when it had begun to grow dark, he went out into the kitchen to the girl. But though he rubbed his eyes and did everything he could to keep himself awake, it was all in vain. For the Pushibride crooned and sang till his eyes were fast closed, and when the beautiful young maiden came, he was sound asleep and snoring. This time also, as before, she borrowed a brush and brushed her hair with it, and the gold dropped down as she did it, and again she sent the dog out 3 times, and when day dawned she departed. But as she was going, she said, as she had said before, "I shall come once more," and then never again. On the 3rd Thursday night, the king once more insisted on keeping watch. Then he set 2 men to hold him. Each of them was to take an arm and shake him and jerk him by the arm whenever he seemed to be going to fall asleep. And he set 2 men to watch his bushy bride. But as the night wore on, the bushy bride again began to croon and to sing, so that his eyes began to close and his head to droop on one side. Then came the lovely maiden, and got the brush and brushed her hair till the gold dropped from it. And then she sent her little Snow out to see if it would soon be day, and this she did 3 times. The 3rd time it was just beginning to grow light, and then she said, "Out on thee, ugly bushy bride, sleeping so soft by the young king's side. On sand and stones my bed I make, and my brother sleeps with the cold snake, unpitied and unwept. Now I shall never come again," she said. And then she turned to go, but the 2 men who were holding the king by the arms seized his hands and forced a knife into his grasp, and then made him cut her little finger just enough to make it bleed. Thus the true bride was freed. The king then awoke, and she told him all that had taken place, and how her stepmother and stepsister had betrayed her. Then the brother was at once taken out of the snake pit. The snakes had never touched him, and the stepmother and stepsister were flung down into it instead of him. No one can tell how delighted the king was to get rid of that hideous bushy bride and get a queen who was bright and beautiful as day itself. And now the real wedding was held, and held in such a way that it was heard of and spoken about all over 7 kingdoms. The king and his bride drove to church, and Little Snow was in the carriage too. When the blessing was given, they went home again, and after that I saw no more of them. Dappelgrimm. There was once upon a time a couple of rich folks who had 12 sons, and when the youngest was grown up, he would not stay at home any longer, but would go out into the world and seek his fortune. His father and mother said that they thought he was very well off at home, and that he was welcome to stay with them. But he could not rest, and said that he must and would go. So at last they had to give him leave. When he had walked a long way, he came to a king's palace. There he asked for a place and got it. Now, the daughter of the king of that country had been carried off into the mountains by a troll, and the king had no other children, and for this cause both he and all his people were full of sorrow and affliction, and the king had promised the princess and half his kingdom to anyone who could set her free, but there was no one who could do it, though a great number had tried. So when the youth had been there for the space of a year or so, he wanted to go home again to pay his parents a visit. But when he got there, his father and mother were dead, and his brothers had divided everything that their parents possessed between themselves, so that there was nothing at all left for him. "Shall I, then, receive nothing at all of my inheritance?" asked the youth. "Who could know that you were still alive, you who have been a wanderer so long?" answered the brothers. "However, there are 12 mares upon the hills, which we have not yet divided among us, and if you would like to have them for your share, you may take them." So the youth, well pleased with this, thanked them, and at once set off to the hill where the 12 mares were at pasture. When he got up there and found them, each mare had her foal, and by the side of one of them was a big dapple grey foal as well, which was so sleek that it shone again. "Well, my little foal, you are a fine fellow," said the youth. "But if you will kill all the other little foals, so that I can suck all the mares for a year, you shall see how big and handsome I shall be then," said the foal. So the youth did this. He killed all the 12 foals, and then went back again. Next year, when he came home again to look after his mares and the foal, it was as fat as it could be, and its coat shone with brightness, and it was so big that the lad had the greatest difficulty in getting on its back, and each of the mares had another foal. "Well, it's very evident that I have lost nothing by letting you suck all my mares," said the lad to the yearling. "But now you are quite big enough, and must come away with me." "No," said the colt, "I must stay here another year, kill the 12 little foals, and then I can suck all the mares this year also. And you shall see how big and handsome I shall be by summer." So the youth did it again, and when he went up on the hill next year to look after his colt and the mares, each of the mares had her foal again, but the dappled coat was so big that when the lad wanted to feel its neck to see how fat it was, he could not reach up to it. It was so high, and it was so bright that the light glanced off its coat. "Big and handsome you were last year, my colt, but this year you are ever so much handsomer," said the youth. "In all the king's court no such horse is to be found. But now you shall come away with me." "No," said the dappled coat once more. "Here I must stay for another year. Just kill the 12 little foals again, so that I can suck the mares this year also, and then come and look at me in the summer." So the youth did it. He killed all the little foals, and then went home again. But next year, when he returned to look after the dappled colt and the mares, he was quite appalled. He had never imagined that any horse could become so big and overgrown, for the dappled horse had to lie down on all fours before the youth could get on his back. And it was very hard to do that, even when it was lying down, and it was so plump that its coat shone and glistened just as if it had been a looking-glass. This time the dappled horse was not unwilling to go away with the youth, so he mounted it, and when he came riding home to his brothers, they all smote their hands together and crossed themselves, for never in their lives had they either seen or heard tell of such a horse as that. "If you will procure me the best shoes for my horse, and the most magnificent saddle and bridle that can be found," said the youth, "you may have all my 12 mares just as they are standing out on the hill, and their 12 foals into the bargain." For this year also each mare had her foal. The brothers were quite willing to do this, so the lad got such shoes for his horse that the sticks and stones flew high up into the air as he rode away over the hills, and such a gold saddle and such a gold bridle that they could be seen glittering and glancing from afar. "And now we will go to the king's palace," said Dappelgrimm. That was the horse's name, but bear in mind that you must ask the king for a good stable and excellent fodder for me. So the lad promised not to forget to do that. He rode to the palace, and it will be easily understood that with such a horse as he had, he was not long on the way. When he arrived there, the king was standing out on the steps, and how he did stare at the man who came riding up. "Nay," said he, "never in my whole life have I seen such a man and such a horse." And when the youth inquired if he could have a place in the king's palace, the king was so delighted that he could have danced on the steps where he was standing, and there and then the lad was told that he should have a place. "Yes, but I must have a good stable and most excellent fodder for my horse," said he. So they told him that he should have sweet hay and oats, and as much of them as the dappled horse chose to have, and all the other riders had to take their horses out of the stable that Dappelgrimm might stand alone and really have plenty of room. But this did not last long, for the other people in the king's court became envious of the lad, and there was no bad thing that they would not have done to him if they had but dared. At last they bethought themselves of telling the king that the youth had said that if he chose, he was quite able to rescue the princess who had been carried off into the mountain a long time ago by the troll. The king immediately summoned the lad into his presence, and said that he had been informed that he had said that it was in his power to rescue the princess, so he was now to do it. If he succeeded in this, he no doubt knew that the king had promised his daughter and half the kingdom to anyone who set her free, which promise should be faithfully and honourably kept, but if he failed, he should be put to death. The youth denied that he had said this, but all to no purpose, for the king was deaf to all his words, so there was nothing to be done but say that he would make the attempt. He went down into the stable, and very sad and full of care he was. Then Dappelgrimm inquired why he was so troubled, and the youth told him, and said that he did not know what to do, for as to setting the princess free, that was downright impossible. "Oh, but it might be done," said Dappelgrimm. "I will help you, but you must first have me well shod. You must ask for 10 pounds of iron and 12 pounds of steel for the shoeing, and 1 smith to hammer and 1 to hold." So the youth did this, and no one said him nay. He got both the iron and the steel and the smiths, and thus was Dappelgrimm shod strongly and well. And when the youth went out of the king's palace, a cloud of dust rose up behind him. But when he came to the mountain into which the princess had been carried, the difficulty was to ascend the precipitous wall of rock, by which he was to get on to the mountain beyond, for the rock stood right up on end, as steep as a house-side, and as smooth as a sheet of glass. The first time the youth rode at it, he got a little way up the precipice, but then both Dappelgrimm's 4 legs slipped, and down came horse and rider with a sound like thunder among the mountains. The next time that he rode at it, he got a little farther up, but then one of Dappelgrimm's forelegs slipped, and down they went with the sound of a landslip. But the third time Dappelgrimm said, "Now we must show what we can do," and went at it once more till the stone sprang up sky high, and thus they got up. Then the lad rode into the mountain cleft at full gallop and caught up the princess on his saddle bow, and then out again before the troll even had time to stand up, and thus the princess was set free. When the youth returned to the palace, the king was both happy and delighted to get his daughter back again, as may easily be believed. But somehow or other the people about the court had so worked on him that he was angry with the lad too. "Thou shalt have my thanks for setting my princess free," he said, when the youth came into the palace with her, and was then about to go away. "She ought to be just as much my princess as she is yours now, for you are a man of your word," said the youth. "Yes, yes," said the king. "Have her thou shalt, as I have said it. But first of all, thou must make the sun shine into my palace here." For there was a large and high hill outside the windows, which overshadowed the palace so much that the sun could not shine in. "That was no part of our bargain," answered the youth, "but as nothing that I can say will move you, I suppose I shall have to try to do my best for the princess I will have." So he went down to Dappelgrimm again and told him what the king desired, and Dappelgrimm thought that it might easily be done. But first of all he must have new shoes, and 10 pounds of iron and 12 pounds of steel must go to the making of them, and 2 smiths were also necessary, one to hammer and one to hold, and then it would be very easy to make the sun shine into the king's palace. The lad asked for these things and obtained them instantly, for the king thought that for very shame he could not refuse to give them, and so Dappelgrimm got new shoes, and they were good ones. The youth seated himself on him, and once more they went their way, and for each hop that Dappelgrimm made, down went the hill 15 ells into the earth. And so they went on, until there was no hill left for the king to see. When the youth came down again to the king's palace, he asked the king if the princess should not at last be his. For now no one could say that the sun was not shining into the palace. But the other people in the palace had again stirred up the king, and he answered that the youth should have her, and that he had never intended that he should not, but first of all he must get her quite as good a horse to ride to the wedding on as that which he had himself. The youth said that the king had never told him he was to do that, and it seemed to him that he had now really earned the princess. But the king stuck to what he had said, and if the youth were unable to do it, he was to lose his life, the king said. The youth went down to the stable again, and very sad and sorrowful he was, as anyone may well imagine. Then he told Dappelgrimm that the king had now required that he should get the princess as good a bridal horse as that which the bridegroom had, or he should lose his life. "But that will be no easy thing to do," said he, "for your equal is not to be found in all the world." "Oh yes, there is one to match me," said Dappelgrimm, "but it will not be easy to get him, for he is underground. However, we will try. Now you must go up to the king and ask for new shoes for me, and for them we must again have 10 pounds of iron, 12 pounds of steel, and 2 smiths, one to hammer and one to hold, but be very particular to see that the hooks are very sharp. And you must also ask for 12 barrels of rye, and 12 slaughtered oxen must we have with us, and all the 12 ox hides with 1200 spikes set in each of them. All these things must we have. Likewise a barrel of tar with 12 tons of tar in it." The youth went to the king and asked for all the things that Dappelgrimm had named, and once more, as the king thought that it would be disgraceful to refuse them to him, he obtained them all. So he mounted Dappelgrimm and rode away from the court, and when he had ridden for a long, long time over hills and moors, Dappelgrimm asked, "Do you hear anything?" Yes, there is such a dreadful whistling up above in the air that I think I am growing alarmed, said the youth. That is all the wild birds in the forest flying about. They are sent to stop us, said Dappelgrimm. But just cut a hole in the corn sacks, and then they will be so busy with the corn that they will forget us. The youth did it. He cut holes in the corn sacks so that barley and rye ran out on every side, and all the wild birds that were in the forest came in such numbers that they darkened the sun. But when they caught sight of the corn, they could not refrain from it, but flew down and began to scratch and pick at the corn and rye, and at last they began to fight among themselves, and forgot all about the youth and Dappelgrimm, and did them no harm. And now the youth rode onwards for a long, long time, over hill and dale, over rocky places and morasses, and then Dappelgrimm began to listen again, and asked the youth if he heard anything now. Yes, now I hear such a dreadful crackling and crashing in the forest on every side that I think I shall be really afraid, said the youth. That is all the wild beasts in the forest, said Dappelgrimm. They are sent out to stop us. But just throw out the 12 carcasses of the oxen, and they will be so much occupied with them that they will quite forget us. So the youth threw out the carcasses of the oxen, and then all the wild beasts in the forest, both bears and wolves and lions and grim beasts of all kinds, came. But when they caught sight of the carcasses of the oxen, they began to fight for them till the blood flowed, and they entirely forgot Dappelgrimm and the youth. So the youth rode onwards again, and many were the new scenes they saw. For travelling on Dappelgrimm's back was not travelling slowly, as may be imagined. And then Dappelgrimm neighed. "Do you hear anything?" he said. "Yes, I heard something like a foal neighing quite plainly." "A long, long way off," answered the youth. "That's a full-grown coat," said Dappelgrimm, "if you hear it so plainly when it is so far away from us." So they travelled onwards a long time, and saw one new scene after another once more. Then Dappelgrimm neighed again. "Do you hear anything now?" said he. "Yes, now I heard it quite distinctly, and it neighed like a full-grown horse," answered the youth. "Yes, and you will hear it again very soon," said Dappelgrimm, "and then you will hear what a voice it has." So they travelled on through many more different kinds of country, and then Dappelgrimm neighed for the third time. But before he could ask the youth if he heard anything, there was such a neighing on the other side of the heath that the youth thought that hills and rocks would be rent in pieces. "Now he is here," said Dappelgrimm. "Be quick, and fling over me the ox hides that have the spikes in them. Throw the 12 tons of tar over the field, and climb up into that great spruce fir tree. When he comes, fire will spurt out of both his nostrils, and then the tar will catch fire. Now mark what I say. If the flame ascends, I conquer, and if it sinks, I fail. But if you see that I am winning, fling the bridle, which you must take off me, over his head, and then he will become quite gentle." Just as the youth had flung all the hides with the spikes over Dappelgrimm and the tar over the field, and had got safely up into the spruce fir, a horse came with flames spouting from his nostrils, and the tar caught fire in a moment, and Dappelgrimm and the horse began to fight until the stones leapt up to the sky. They bit, and they fought with their forelegs and their hind legs, and sometimes the youth looked at them, and sometimes he looked at the tar, but at last the flames began to rise, for wheresoever the strange horse bit, or wheresoever he kicked, he hit upon the spikes in the hides, and at length he had to yield. When the youth saw that, he was not long in getting down from the tree and flinging the bridle over the horse's head, and then he became so tame that he might have been led by a thin string. This horse was dappled too, and so like Dappelgrimm that no one could distinguish the one from the other. The youth seated himself on the dappled horse which he had captured, and rode home again to the king's palace, and Dappelgrimm ran loose by his side. When he got there, the king was standing outside in the courtyard. "Can you tell me which is the horse I have caught, and which is the one I had before?" said the youth. "If you can't, I think your daughter is mine." The king went and looked at both the dappled horses. He looked high and he looked low. He looked before and he looked behind, but there was not a hair's difference between the two. "No," said the king, "that I cannot tell thee. And as thou hast procured such a splendid bridal horse for my daughter, thou shalt have her. But first we must have one more trial, just to see if thou art fated to have her. She shall hide herself twice, and then thou shalt hide thyself twice. If thou canst find her each time that she hides herself, and if she cannot find thee in thy hiding places, then it is fated, and thou shalt have the princess." "That, too, was not in our bargain," said the youth, "but we will make this trial, since it must be so." So the king's daughter was to hide herself first. Then she changed herself into a duck, and lay swimming in a lake that was just outside the palace. But the youth went down into the stable and asked Dappelgrimm what she had done with herself. "Oh, all that you have to do is to take your gun and go down to the water and aim at the duck which is swimming about there, and she will soon discover herself," said Dappelgrimm. The youth snatched up his gun and ran to the lake. "I will just have a shot at that duck," said he, and began to aim at it. "Oh no, dear friend." "Don't shoot, it is I," said the princess. So he had found her once. The second time the princess changed herself into a loaf, and laid herself on the table among 4 other loaves, and she was so like the other loaves that no one could see any difference between them. But the youth again went down to the stable to Dappelgrimm, and told him that the princess had hidden herself again, and that he had not the least idea what had become of her. "Oh, just take a very large bread knife, sharpen it, and pretend that you are going to cut straight through the third of the 4 loaves which are lying on the kitchen table in the king's palace. Count them from right to left. And you will soon find her," said Dappelgrimm. So the youth went up to the kitchen and began to sharpen the largest bread knife that he could find. Then he caught hold of the 3rd loaf on the left-hand side and put the knife to it as if he meant to cut it straight in 2. "I will have a bit of this bread for myself," said he. "No, dear friend, don't cut, it is I," said the princess again. So he had found her the second time, and now it was his turn to go and hide himself. But Dappelgrimm had given him such good instructions that it was not easy to find him. First he turned himself into a horsefly and hid himself in Dappelgrimm's left nostril. The princess went poking about and searching everywhere, high and low, and wanted to go into Dappelgrimm's stall too, but he began to bite and kick about so that she was afraid to go there and could not find the youth. "Well," said she, "as I am unable to find you, you must show yourself." Whereupon the youth immediately appeared, standing there on the stable floor. Dappelgrimm told him what he was to do the second time, and he turned himself into a lump of earth, and stuck himself between the hoof and the shoe on Dappelgrimm's left forefoot. Once more the king's daughter went and sought everywhere, inside and outside, until at last she came into the stable and wanted to go into the stall beside Dappelgrimm. So this time he allowed her to go into it, and she peered about high and low. But she could not look under his hoofs, for he stood much too firmly on his legs for that, and she could not find the youth. "Well, you will just have to show where you are yourself, for I can't find you," said the princess, and in an instant the youth was standing by her side on the floor of the stable. "Now you are mine," said he to the princess. "Now you can see that it is fated that she should be mine," he said to the king. "Yes, fated it is," said the king. "So what must be, must." Then everything was made ready for the wedding with great splendour and promptitude, and the youth rode to church on Dappelgrimm and the king's daughter on the other horse. So everyone must see that they could not be long on their way thither. Drakestail. Drakestail was very little, that is why he was called Drakestail, but tiny as he was, he had brains, and he knew what he was about. For having begun with nothing, he ended by amassing 100 crowns. Now the king of the country, who was very extravagant and never kept any money, having heard that Drakestail had some, went one day in his own person to borrow his hoard, and, my word, in those days Drakestail was not a little proud of having lent money to the king. But after the first and second year, seeing that they never even dreamed of paying the interest, he became uneasy. So much so that at last he resolved to go and see his Majesty himself and get repaid. So, one fine morning, Drakestail, very spruce and fresh, takes the road singing, "Quack, quack, quack, when shall I get my money back?" He had not gone far when he met friend Fox on his rounds that way. "Good morning, neighbour," says the friend. "Where are you off to so early?" "I am going to the king for what he owes me." "Oh, take me with thee," Drakestail said to himself. "One can't have too many friends." "I will," says he, "but going on all fours, you will soon be tired. Make yourself quite small. Get into my throat. Go into my gizzard, and I will carry you." "Happy thought," says friend Fox. He takes bag and baggage, and, presto, is gone like a letter into the post. And Drakestail is off again, all spruce and fresh, still singing, "Quack, quack, quack, when shall I have my money back?" He had not gone far when he met his lady friend Ladder, leaning on her wall. "Good morning, my duckling," says the lady friend. "Whither away so bold?" "I am going to the king for what he owes me." "Oh, take me with thee," Drakestail said to himself. "One can't have too many friends." "I will," says he, "but with your wooden legs you will soon be tired. Make yourself quite small. Get into my throat. Go into my gizzard, and I will carry you." "Happy thought," says my friend Ladder, and nimble bag and baggage goes to keep company with friend Fox, and quack, quack, quack. Drakestail is off again, singing and spruce as before. A little farther he meets his sweetheart, my friend River, wandering quietly in the sunshine. "Thou, my cherub," says she, "whither so lonesome with arching tail on this muddy road?" "I am going to the king, you know, for what he owes me." "Oh, take me with thee," Drakestail said to himself. "We can't be too many friends." "I will," says he, "but you who sleep while you walk will soon be tired. Make yourself quite small. Get into my throat. Go into my gizzard, and I will carry you." "Ah, happy thought," says my friend River. She takes bag and baggage, and glue, 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 she takes her place between friend Fox and my friend Ladder. And quack, quack, quack. Drakestail is off again singing. A little farther on he meets Comrade Wasp's nest, manoeuvring his wasps. "Well, good morning, friend Drakestail," said Comrade Wasp's nest. "Where are we bound for so spruce and fresh?" "I am going to the king for what he owes me." "Oh, take me with thee," Drakestail said to himself. "One can't have too many friends." "I will," says he, "but with your battalion to drag along, you will soon be tired. Make yourself quite small. Go into my throat. Get into my gizzard, and I will carry you." "By Jove, that's a good idea," says Comrade Wasp's nest, and left file. He takes the same road to join the others with all his party. There was not much more room, but by closing up a bit, they managed, and Drakesdale is off again singing. He arrived thus at the capital, and threaded his way straight up the high street, still running and singing, "Quack, quack, 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 when shall I get my money back?" to the great astonishment of the good folks, till he came to the king's palace. He strikes with the knocker, tock, tock. "Who is there?" asked the porter, putting his head out of the wicket. "'Tis I, Drakesdale. I wish to speak to the king." "Speak to the king? That's easily said. The king is dining, and will not be disturbed. Tell him that it is I, and I have come. He well knows why." The porter shuts his wicket and goes up to say it to the king, who was just sitting down to dinner with a napkin round his neck, and all his ministers. "Good, good," said the king, laughing. "I know what it is. Make him come in, and put him with the turkeys and chickens." The porter descends. "Have the goodness to enter." "Good," says Drakesdale to himself. "I shall now see how they eat at court." This way, says the porter. "One step further. There you are." "How? What? In the poultry yard?" Fancy how vexed Drakesdale was. "Ah, so that's it," says he. "Wait, I will compel you to receive me. Quack, 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 when shall I get my money back?" But turkeys and chickens are creatures who don't like people that are not as themselves. When they saw the newcomer and how he was made, and when they heard him crying too, they began to look black at him. What is it? What does he want? Finally they rushed at him all together to overwhelm him with pecks. "I am lost," said Drakesdale to himself, when by good luck he remembers his comrade friend Fox, and he cries, "Reynard, Reynard, come out of your earth, or Drakesdale's life is of little worth." Then friend Fox, who was only waiting for these words, hastens out, throws himself on the wicked fowls, and quick, quack, he tears them to pieces, so much so that at the end of 5 minutes there was not one left alive. And Drakesdale, quite content, began to sing again. "Quack, quack, quack, when shall I get my money back?" When the king, who was still at table, heard this refrain, and the poultry woman came to tell him what had been going on in the yard, he was terribly annoyed. He ordered them to throw this tail of a drake into the well to make an end of him, and it was done as he commanded. Drakesdale was in despair of getting himself out of such a deep hole, when he remembered his lady friend, the ladder. "Ladder, ladder, come out of thy hold, or Drakesdale's days will soon be told." My friend Ladder, who was only waiting for these words, hastens out, leans her 2 arms on the edge of the well. Then Drakesdale climbs nimbly on her back, and hop! He is in the yard, where he begins to sing louder than ever. When the king, who was still at table, and laughing at the good trick he had played, his creditor, heard him again reclaiming his money, he became livid with rage. He commanded that the furnace should be heated, and this tail of a drake thrown into it, because he must be a sorcerer. The furnace was soon hot, but this time Drakesdale was not so afraid. He counted on his sweetheart, my friend River. "River, river, outward flow, or to death Drakesdale must go." My friend River hastens out, and off throws herself into the furnace, which she floods with all the people who had lighted it, after which she flowed growling into the hall of the palace to the height of more than 4 feet, and Drakesdale, quite content, begins to swim, singing deafeningly, "Quack, quack, 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 when shall I get my money back?" The king was still at table, and thought himself quite sure of his game. But when he heard Drakesdale singing again, And when they told him all that had passed, he became furious and got up from table brandishing his fists. "Bring him here, and I'll cut his throat." "Bring him here quick!" cried he, and quickly 2 footmen ran to fetch Drakestail. "At last," said the poor chap, going up the great stairs, "they have decided to receive me." Imagine his terror when on entering he sees the king as red as a turkey cock, and all his ministers attending him standing sword in hand. He thought this time it was all up with him. Happily, he remembered that there was still one remaining friend, and he cried with dying accents, wasp's nest, make a sally, or Drakestail nevermore may rally." Hereupon the scene changes. "Bees, bees, bayonet them!" The brave wasp's nest rushes out with all his wasps. They threw themselves on the infuriated king and his ministers, and stung them so fiercely in the face that they lost their heads. And not knowing where to hide themselves, they all jumped pell-mell from the window and broke their necks on the pavement. Behold Drakestail, much astonished, all alone in the big saloon and master of the field. He could not get over it. Nevertheless, he remembered shortly what he had come for to the palace, and improving the occasion, he set to work to hunt for his dear money. But in vain he rummaged in all the drawers, he found nothing, all had been spent, and ferreting thus from room to room, he came at last to the one with the throne in it, and feeling fatigued, he sat himself down on it to think over his adventure. In the meanwhile, the people had found their king and his ministers with their feet in the air on the pavement, and they had gone into the palace to know how it had occurred. On entering the throne room, when the crowd saw that there was already someone on the royal seat, they broke out in cries of surprise and joy. "The king is dead! Long live the king! Heaven has sent us down this thing!" Drakestail, who was no longer surprised at anything, received the acclamations of the people as if he had never done anything else all his life. A few of them certainly murmured that a Drakestail would make a fine king. Those who knew him replied that a knowing Drakestail was a more worthy king than a spendthrift like him who was lying on the pavement. In short, they ran and took the crown off the head of the deceased and placed it on that of Drakestail, whom it fitted like wax. Thus he became king. "And now," said he after the ceremony, "ladies and gentlemen, let's go to supper. I am so hungry." Farmer Weatherbeard. There was once upon a time a man and a woman who had an only son, and he was called Jack. The woman thought that it was his duty to go out to service, and told her husband that he was to take him somewhere. "You must get him such a good place that he will become master of all masters," she said, and then she put some food and a roll of tobacco into a bag for them. Well, they went to a great many masters, but all said that they could make the lad as good as they were themselves, but better than that, they could not make him. When the man came home to the old woman with this answer, she said, "I shall be equally well pleased whatever you do with him, but this I do say, that you are to have him made a master over all masters." Then she once more put some food and a roll of tobacco into the bag, and the man and his son had to set out again. When they had walked some distance, they got upon the ice, and there they met a man in a carriage who was driving a black horse. "Where are you going?" he said. "I have to go and get my son apprenticed to someone who will be able to teach him a trade. For my old woman comes of such well-to-do folk that she insists on his being taught to be master of all masters," said the man. "We are not ill met, then," said the man who was driving, "for I am the kind of man who can do that, and I am just looking out for such an apprentice. Get up behind with you," he said to the boy, and off the horse went with them straight up into the air. "No, no, wait a little," screamed the father of the boy. "I ought to know what your name is and where you live." "Oh," I am at home both in the north and the south and the east and the west, and I am called Farmer Weatherbeard," said the master. "You may come here again in a year's time, and then I will tell you if the lad suits me." And then they set off again and were gone. When the man got home, the old woman inquired what had become of the son. "Ah, heaven only knows what has become of him," said the man. They went up aloft, and then he told her what had happened. But when the woman heard that, and found that the man did not at all know either when their son would be out of his apprenticeship or where he had gone, she packed him off again to find out, and gave him a bag of food and a roll of tobacco to take away with him. When he had walked for some time, he came to a great wood, and it stretched before him all day long as he went on. And when night began to fall, he saw a great light, and went towards it. After a long, long time, he came to a small hut at the foot of a rock, outside which an old woman was standing drawing water up from a well with her nose. It was so long. "Good evening, mother," said the man. "Good evening to you too," said the old woman. "No one has called me mother this 100 years. Can I lodge here tonight?" said the man. "No," said the old woman, but the man took out his roll of tobacco, lighted a little of it, and then gave her a whiff. Then she was so delighted that she began to dance, and thus the man got leave to stay the night there. It was not long before he asked about Farmer Weatherbeard. She said that she knew nothing about him, but that she ruled over all the 4-footed beasts, and some of them might know him. So she gathered them all together by blowing a whistle which she had, and questioned them, but there was not one of them which knew anything about Farmer Weatherbeard. "Well," said the old woman, "there are 3 of us sisters. It may be that one of the other 2 knows where he is to be found. You shall have the loan of my horse and carriage, and then you will get there by night. But her house is 300 miles off. Go the nearest way you will." The man set out and got there at night. When he arrived, this old woman also was standing drawing water out of the well with her nose. "Good evening, mother," said the man. "Good evening to you," said the old woman. "No one has ever called me mother this 100 years. "Can I lodge here tonight?" said the man. "No," said the old woman. Then he took out the roll of tobacco, took a whiff, and gave the old woman some snuff on the back of her hand. Then she was so delighted that she began to dance, and the man got leave to stay all night. It was not long before he began to ask about Farmer Weatherbeard. She knew nothing about him, but she ruled over all the fishes, she said, and perhaps some of them might know something. So she gathered them all together by blowing a whistle, which she had, and questioned them. But there was not one of them which knew anything about Farmer Weatherbeard. "Well," said the old woman, "I have another sister. Perhaps she may know something about him. She lives 600 miles off, but you shall have my horse and carriage, and then you will get there by nightfall." So the man set off, and he got there by nightfall. The old woman was standing raking the fire, and she was doing it with her nose, so long it was. "Good evening, mother," said the man. "Good evening to you," said the old woman. "No one has called me mother this 100 years. Can I lodge here tonight?" said the man. "No," said the old woman, but the man pulled out his roll of tobacco again, and filled his pipe with some of it, and gave the old woman enough snuff to cover the back of her hand. Then she was so delighted that she began to dance, and the man got leave to stay in her house. It was not long before he asked about Farmer Weatherbeard. She knew nothing at all about him, she said, but she governed all the birds, and she gathered them together with her whistle. When she questioned them all, the eagle was not there, but it came soon afterwards, and when asked, it said that it had just come from Farmer Weatherbeard's. Then the old woman said that it was to guide the man to him, but the eagle would have something to eat first, and then it wanted to wait until the next day, for it was so tired with the long journey that it was scarcely able to rise from the earth. When the eagle had had plenty of food and rest, the old woman plucked a feather out of its tail and set the man in the feather's place, and then the bird flew away with him. But they did not get to Farmer Weatherbeard's before midnight. When they got there, the eagle said, "There are a great many dead bodies lying outside the door, but you must not concern yourself about them. The people who are inside the house are all so sound asleep that it will not be easy to awake them. But you must go straight to the table drawer and take out 3 bits of bread, and if you hear anyone snoring, pluck 3 feathers from his head. He will not waken for that." The man did this. When he had got the bits of bread, he first plucked out 1 feather. "Oof!" screamed Farmer Weatherbeard. So the man plucked out another, and then Farmer Weatherbeard shrieked, "Oof!" again. But when the man had plucked the 3rd, Farmer Weatherbeard screamed so loudly that the man thought that brick and mortar would be rent in twain. But for all that, he went on sleeping. And now the eagle told the man what he was to do next, and he did it. He went to the stable door, and there he stumbled against a hard stone, which he picked up, and beneath it lay 3 splinters of wood, which he also picked up. He knocked at the stable door, and it opened at once. He threw down the 3 little bits of bread, and a hare came out and ate them. He caught the hare. Then the eagle told him to pluck 3 feathers out of its tail, and put in the hare, the stone, the splinters of wood, and himself instead of them, and then he would be able to carry them all home. When the eagle had flown a long way, it alighted on a stone. "Do you see anything?" it asked. "Yes, I see a flock of crows coming flying after us," said the man. "Then we shall do well to fly on a little farther," said the eagle, and off it set. In a short time it asked again, "Do you see anything now?" "Yes, now the crows are close behind us," said the man. "Then throw down the 3 feathers which you plucked out of his head," said the eagle. So the man did this, and no sooner had he flung them down than the feathers became a flock of ravens, which chased the crows home again. Then the eagle flew on much farther with the man, but at length it alighted on a stone for a while. "Do you see anything?" it said. "I am not quite certain," said the man, "but I think I see something coming in the far distance." "Then we shall do well to fly on a little farther," said the eagle, and away it went. "Do you see anything now?" it said, after some time had gone by. "Yes, now they are close behind us," said the man. "Then throw down the splinters of wood which you took from beneath the grey stone by the stable door," said the eagle. The man did this, and no sooner had he flung them down than they grew up into a great thick wood, and Farmer Weatherbeard had to go home for an axe to cut his way through it. So the eagle flew on a long, long way, but then it grew tired and sat down on a fir tree. "Do you see anything?" it asked. "Yes, I am not quite certain," said the man, "but I think I can catch a glimpse of something far, far away." "Then we shall do well to fly on a little farther," said the eagle, and it set off again. "Do you see anything now?" it said after some time had gone by. "Yes, he is close behind us now," said the man. "Then you must fling down the great stone which you took away from the stable door," said the eagle. The man did so, and it turned into a great high mountain of stone, which Farmer Weatherbeard had to break his way through before he could follow them. But when he had got to the middle of the mountain, he broke one of his legs, so he had to go home to get it put right. While he was doing this, the eagle flew off to the man's home with him, and with the hare. And when they had got home, the man went to the churchyard and had some Christian earth laid upon the hare, and then it turned into his son Jack. When the time came for the fair, the youth turned himself into a light-coloured horse, and bade his father go to the market with him. "If anyone should come who wants to buy me," said he, "you are to tell him that you want $100 for me, but you must not forget to take off the halter, for if you do, I shall never be able to get away from Farmer Weatherbeard, for he is the man who will come and bargain for me." And thus it happened. A horse dealer came who had a great fancy to bargain for the horse, and the man got $100 for it. But when the bargain was made, and Jack's father had got the money, the horse dealer wanted to have the halter. "That was no part of our bargain," said the man, "and the halter you shall not have, for I have other horses which I shall have to sell." So each of them went his way. But the horse dealer had not got very far with Jack before he resumed his own form again, and when the man got home he was sitting on the bench by the stove. The next day he changed himself into a brown horse and told his father that he was to set off to market with him. "If a man should come who wants to buy me," said Jack, "you are to tell him that you want $200, for that he will give, and treat you besides. But whatsoever you drink, and whatsoever you do, don't forget to take the halter off me, or you will never see me more." And thus it happened. The man got his $200 for the horse, and was treated as well. And when they parted from each other, it was just as much as he could do to remember to take off the halter. But the buyer had not got far on his way before the youth took his own form again. And when the man reached home, Jack was already sitting on the bench by the stove. On the third day, all happened in the same way. The youth changed himself into a great black horse, and told his father that if a man came and offered him $300, and treated him well and handsomely into the bargain, he was to sell him. But whatsoever he did, or how much soever he drank, he must not forget to take off the halter, or else he himself would never get away from Farmer Weatherbeard as long as he lived. "No," said the man, "I will not forget." When he got to the market, he received the $300, but Farmer Weatherbeard treated him so handsomely that he quite forgot to take off the halter. So Farmer Weatherbeard went away with the horse. When he had got some distance, he had to go into an inn to get some more brandy. So he set a barrel full of red-hot nails under his horse's nose, and a trough filled with oats beneath its tail. And then he tied the halter fast to a hook and went away into the inn. So the horse stood there stamping and kicking and snorting and rearing, and out came a girl who thought it a sin and a shame to treat a horse so ill. "Ah, poor creature, what a master you must have to treat you thus," she said, and pushed the halter off the hook so that the horse might turn round and eat the oats. "I am here!" shrieked Farmer Weatherbeard, rushing out of doors. But the horse had already shaken off the halter and flung himself into a goose pond, where he changed himself into a little fish. Farmer Weatherbeard went after him and changed himself into a great pike. So Jack turned himself into a dove, and Farmer Weatherbeard turned himself into a hawk and flew after the dove and struck it. But a princess was standing at a window in the king's palace watching the struggle. "If thou didst but know as much as I know, thou wouldst fly in to me through the window," said the princess to the dove. So the dove came flying in through the window and changed itself into Jack again, and told her all as it had happened. "Change thyself into a gold ring, and set thyself on my finger," said the princess. "No, that will not do," said Jack, "for then Farmer Weatherbeard will make the king fall sick, and there will be no one who can make him well again before Farmer Weatherbeard comes and cures him, and for that he will demand the gold ring." "I will say that it was my mother's, and that I will not part with it," said the princess. So Jack changed himself into a gold ring, and set himself on the princess's finger, and Farmer Weatherbeard could not get at him there. But then all that the youth had foretold came to pass. The king became ill, and there was no doctor who could cure him till Farmer Weatherbeard arrived, and he demanded the ring which was on the princess's finger as a reward. So the king sent a messenger to the princess for the ring. She, however, refused to part with it because she had inherited it from her mother. When the king was informed of this, he fell into a rage and said that he would have the ring, let her have inherited it from whom she might. "Well, it's of no use to be angry about it," said the princess, "for I can't get it off. If you want the ring, you will have to take the finger too. I will try, and then the ring will very soon come off," said Farmer Weatherbeard. "No, thank you, I will try myself," said the princess, and she went away to the fireplace and put some ashes on the ring. So the ring came off and was lost among the ashes. Farmer Weatherbeard changed himself into a hare, which scratched and scraped about in the fireplace after the ring until the ashes were up to its ears. But Jack changed himself into a fox and bit the hare's head off, and if Farmer Weatherbeard was possessed by the evil one, all was now over with him. Graciosa and Percinet. Once upon a time there lived a king and queen who had one charming daughter. She was so graceful and pretty and clever that she was called Graciosa, and the queen was so fond of her that she could think of nothing else. Every day she gave the princess a lovely new frock of gold brocade, or satin, or velvet, and when she was hungry she had bowls full of sugar plums and at least 20 pots of jam. Everybody said she was the happiest princess in the world. Now there lived at this same court a very rich old duchess whose name was Grumbly. She was more frightful than tongue can tell. Her hair was red as fire, and she had but one eye, and that not a pretty one. Her face was as broad as a full moon, and her mouth was so large that everybody who met her would have been afraid they were going to be eaten up. Only she had no teeth, as she was as cross as she was ugly. She could not bear to hear everyone saying how pretty and how charming Graciosa was, so she presently went away from the court to her own castle, which was not far off. But if anybody who went to see her happened to mention the charming princess, she would cry angrily, "It's not true that she is lovely. I have more beauty in my little finger than she has in her whole body." Soon after this, to the great grief of the princess, the queen was taken ill and died, and the king became so melancholy that for a whole year he shut himself up in his palace. At last his physicians, fearing that he would fall ill, ordered that he should go out and amuse himself, so a hunting party was arranged. But as it was very hot weather, the king soon got tired, and said he would dismount and rest at the castle which they were passing. This happened to be the Duchess Grumbly's castle, and when she heard that the king was coming, she went out to meet him, and said that the cellar was the coolest place in the whole castle, if he would condescend to come down into it. So down they went together, and the king, seeing about 200 great casks ranged side by side, asked if it was only for herself that she had this immense store of wine. "Yes, sire," answered she, "it is for myself alone, but I shall be most happy to let you taste some of it. Which do you like, Canary, St. Julian, Champagne, Hermitage, Sack, Raisin, or cider?" "Well," said the king, "since you are so kind as to ask me, I prefer champagne to anything else." Then Duchess Grumbly took up a little hammer and tapped upon the cask twice, and out came at least 1,000 crowns. "What's the meaning of this?" said she, smiling. Then she tapped the next cask, and out came a bushel of gold pieces. "I don't understand this at all," said the Duchess, smiling more than before. Then she went on to the third cask. Tap, tap, and out came such a stream of diamonds and pearls that the ground was covered with them. "Ah," she cried. "This is altogether beyond my comprehension, sire. Someone must have stolen my good wine and put all this rubbish in its place." "Rubbish, do you call it, Madam Grumbly?" cried the king. "Rubbish! Why, there is enough there to buy 10 kingdoms." "Well," said she, "you must know that all those casks are full of gold and jewels, and if you like to marry me, it shall all be yours." Now the king loved money more than anything else in the world, so he cried joyfully, "Marry you? Why, with all my heart. Tomorrow, if you like." "But I make one condition," said the Duchess. "I must have entire control of your daughter to do as I please with her." "Oh, certainly. You shall have your own way. Let us shake hands upon the bargain," said the king. So they shook hands and went up out of the cellar of treasure together, and the Duchess locked the door and gave the key to the king. When he got back to his own palace, Graciosa ran out to meet him and asked if he had had good sport. "I have caught a dove," answered he. "Oh, do give it to me," said the princess, "and I will keep it and take care of it." "I can hardly do that," said he, "for, to speak more plainly, I mean that I met the Duchess Grumbly, and have promised to marry her." "And you call her a dove?" cried the princess. "I should have called her a screech owl." "Hold your tongue," said the king very crossly. "I intend you to behave prettily to her. So now go and make yourself fit to be seen, as I am going to take you to visit her." So the princess went very sorrowfully to her own room, and her nurse, seeing her tears, asked what was vexing her. "Alas, who would not be vexed?" answered she, "for the king intends to marry again, and has chosen for his new bride my enemy, the hideous Duchess Grumbly." "Oh, well," answered the nurse, "you must remember that you are a princess, and are expected to set a good example in making the best of whatever happens. You must promise me not to let the Duchess see how much you dislike her." At first the princess would not promise, but the nurse showed her so many good reasons for it that in the end she agreed to be amiable to her stepmother. Then the nurse dressed her in a robe of pale green and gold brocade, and combed out her long fair hair till it floated round her like a golden mantle, and put on her head a crown of roses and jasmine with emerald leaves. When she was ready, nobody could have been prettier, but she still could not help looking sad. Meanwhile, the Duchess Grumbly was also occupied in attiring herself. She had one of her shoe heels made an inch or so higher than the other, that she might not limp so much, and put in a cunningly made glass eye in the place of the one she had lost. She dyed her red hair black, and painted her face. Then she put on a gorgeous robe of lilac satin, lined with blue, and a yellow petticoat trimmed with violet ribbons. And because she had heard that queens always rode into their new dominions, she ordered a horse to be made ready for her to ride. While Graciosa was waiting until the king should be ready to set out, she went down all alone through the garden into a little wood, where she sat down upon a mossy bank and began to think. And her thoughts were so doleful that very soon she began to cry, and she cried, and forgot all about going back to the palace, until she suddenly saw a handsome page standing before her. He was dressed in green, and the cap which he held in his hand was adorned with white plumes. When Graciosa looked at him, he went down on one knee and said to her, "Princess, the king awaits you." The princess was surprised, and, if the truth must be told, very much delighted at the appearance of this charming page, whom she could not remember to have seen before. Thinking he might belong to the household of the Duchess, she said, "How long have you been one of the king's pages?" "I am not in the service of the king, madam," answered he, "but in yours." "In mine?" said the princess with great surprise. "Then how is it that I have never seen you before?" "Ah, princess," said he, "I have never before dared to present myself to you, but now the king's marriage threatens you with so many dangers that I have resolved to tell you at once how much I love you already, and I trust that in time I may win your regard. I am Prince Percinet, of whose riches you may have heard, and whose fairy gift will, I hope, be of use to you in all your difficulties, if you will permit me to accompany you under this disguise." "Ah, Percinet," cried the princess, "is it really you? I have so often heard of you and wished to see you. If you will indeed be my friend, I shall not be afraid of that wicked old duchess any more." So they went back to the palace together, and there Graciosa found a beautiful horse which Percinet had brought for her to ride. As it was very spirited, he led it by the bridle, and this arrangement enabled him to turn and look at the princess often, which he did not fail to do. Indeed, she was so pretty that it was a real pleasure to look at her. When the horse which the duchess was to ride appeared beside Graciosa's, it looked no better than an old cart-horse, and as to their trappings, there was simply no comparison between them, as the princess's saddle and bridle were one glittering mass of diamonds. The king had so many other things to think of that he did not notice this, but all his courtiers were entirely taken up with admiring the princess and her charming page in green, who was more handsome and distinguished looking than all the rest of the court put together. When they met the Duchess Grumbly, she was seated in an open carriage, trying in vain to look dignified. The king and the princess saluted her, and her horse was brought forward for her to mount. But when she saw Graciosa's, she cried angrily, "If that child is to have a better horse than mine, I will go back to my own castle this very minute. What is the good of being a queen if one is to be slighted like this?" Upon this the king commanded Graciosa to dismount and to beg the duchess to honour her by mounting her horse. The princess obeyed in silence, and the duchess, without looking at her or thanking her, scrambled up upon the beautiful horse, where she sat looking like a bundle of clothes, and 8 officers had to hold her up for fear she should fall off. Even then she was not satisfied, and was still grumbling and muttering, so they asked her what was the matter. "I wish that page in green to come and lead the horse, as he did when Graciosa rode it," said she very sharply, and the king ordered the page to come and lead the queen's horse. Percinet and the princess looked at one another, but said never a word, and then he did as the king commanded, and the procession started in great pomp. The duchess was greatly elated, and, as she sat there in state, would not have wished to change places even with Graciosa. But at the moment when it was least expected, the beautiful horse began to plunge and rear and kick, and finally to run away at such a pace that it was impossible to stop him. At first the duchess clung to the saddle, but she was very soon thrown off and fell in a heap among the stones and thorns, and there they found her, shaken to a jelly, and collected what was left of her as if she had been a broken glass. Her bonnet was here, and her shoes there, her face was scratched, and her fine clothes were covered with mud. Never was a bride seen in such a dismal plight. They carried her back to the palace and put her to bed, but as soon as she recovered enough to be able to speak, she began to scold and rage, and declared that the whole affair was Graciosa's fault, that she had contrived it on purpose to try and get rid of her, and that if the king would not have her punished, she would go back to her castle and enjoy her riches by herself. At this, the king was terribly frightened, for he did not at all want to lose all those barrels of gold and jewels. So he hastened to appease the duchess, and told her she might punish Graciosa in any way she pleased. Thereupon she sent for Graciosa, who turned pale and trembled at the summons, for she guessed that it promised nothing agreeable for her. She looked all about for Percinet, but he was nowhere to be seen. So she had no choice but to go to the Duchess Grumbly's room. She had hardly got inside the door when she was seized by 4 waiting women, who looked so tall and strong and cruel that the princess shuddered at the sight of them, and still more when she saw them arming themselves with great bundles of rods, and heard the Duchess call out to them from her bed to beat the princess without mercy. Poor Graciosa wished miserably that Percinet could only know what was happening and come to rescue her. But no sooner did they begin to beat her than she found, to her great relief, that the rods had changed to bundles of peacock's feathers. And though the Duchess's women went on till they were so tired that they could no longer raise their arms from their sides, yet she was not hurt in the least. However, the Duchess thought she must be black and blue after such a beating. So Graciosa, when she was released, pretended to feel very bad, and went away into her own room, where she told her nurse all that had happened, and then the nurse left her, and when the princess turned round there stood Percinet beside her. She thanked him gratefully for helping her so cleverly, and they laughed and were very merry over the way they had taken in the Duchess and her waiting maids, but Percinet advised her still to pretend to be ill for a few days, and after promising to come to her aid whenever she needed him, he disappeared as suddenly as he had come. The Duchess was so delighted at the idea that Graciosa was really ill, that she herself recovered twice as fast as she would have done otherwise, and the wedding was held with great magnificence. Now, as the king knew that, above all other things, the queen loved to be told that she was beautiful, he ordered that her portrait should be painted, and that a tournament should be held, at which all the bravest knights of his court should maintain against all comers that Grumbly was the most beautiful princess in the world. Numbers of knights came from far and wide to accept the challenge, and the hideous queen sat in great state in a balcony hung with cloth of gold to watch the contests, and Graciosa had to stand up behind her, where her loveliness was so conspicuous that the combatants could not keep their eyes off her. But the queen was so vain that she thought all their admiring glances were for herself, especially as, in spite of the badness of their cause, the king's knights were so brave that they were the victors in every combat. However, when nearly all the strangers had been defeated, a young, unknown knight presented himself. He carried a portrait, enclosed in a bow, encrusted with diamonds, and he declared himself willing to maintain against them all that the queen was the ugliest creature in the world, and that the princess whose portrait he carried was the most beautiful. So, one by one, the knights came out against him, and one by one he vanquished them all. And then he opened the box and said that, to console them, he would show them the portrait of his Queen of Beauty. And when he did so, everyone recognized the Princess Graciosa. The unknown knight then saluted her gracefully and retired, without telling his name to anybody. But Graciosa had no difficulty in guessing that it was Percinet. As to the queen, she was so furiously angry that she could hardly speak, but she soon recovered her voice, and overwhelmed Graciosa with a torrent of reproaches. "What?" she said. "Do you dare to dispute with me for the prize of beauty, and expect me to endure this insult to my knights? But I will not bear it, proud princess. I will have my revenge." "I assure you, madam," said the princess, "that I had nothing to do with it, and am quite willing that you shall be declared Queen of Beauty." "Ah, you are pleased to jest, Popinjay," said the queen, "but it will be my turn soon." The king was speedily told what had happened, and how the princess was in terror of the angry queen, but he only said, "The queen must do as she pleases. Graciosa belongs to her." The wicked queen waited impatiently until night fell, and then she ordered her carriage to be brought. Graciosa, much against her will, was forced into it, and away they drove, and never stopped, until they reached a great forest, 100 leagues from the palace. This forest was so gloomy, and so full of lions, tigers, bears, and wolves, that nobody dared pass through it even by daylight. And here they set down the unhappy princess in the middle of the black night, and left her in spite of all her tears and entreaties. The princess stood quite still at first from sheer bewilderment, but when the last sound of the retreating carriages died away in the distance, she began to run aimlessly hither and thither, sometimes knocking herself against a tree, sometimes tripping over a stone, fearing every minute that she would be eaten up by the lions. Presently she was too tired to advance another step, so she threw herself down upon the ground and cried miserably, "Oh, Percinet, where are you? Have you forgotten me altogether?" She had hardly spoken when all the forest was lighted up with a sudden glow. Every tree seemed to be sending out a soft radiance, which was clearer than moonlight and softer than daylight, and at the end of a long avenue of trees opposite to her, the princess saw a palace of clear crystal which blazed like the sun. At that moment a slight sound behind her made her start round, and there stood Percinet himself. "Did I frighten you, my princess?" said he. "I come to bid you welcome to our fairy palace in the name of the Queen, my mother, who is prepared to love you as much as I do." The princess joyfully mounted with him into a little sledge drawn by 2 stags, which bounded off and drew them swiftly to the wonderful palace, where the Queen received her with the greatest kindness, and a splendid banquet was served at once. Graciosa was so happy to have found Percinet, and to have escaped from the gloomy forest and all its terrors, that she was very hungry and very merry, and they were a gay party. After supper they went into another lovely room, where the crystal walls were covered with pictures, and the princess saw with great surprise that her own history was represented, even down to the moment when Percinet found her in the forest. "Your painters must indeed be diligent," she said, pointing out the last picture to the prince. "They are obliged to be, for I will not have anything forgotten that happens to you," he answered. When the princess grew sleepy, 24 charming maidens put her to bed in the prettiest room she had ever seen, and then sang to her so sweetly that Graciosa's dreams were all of mermaids, and cool sea waves, and caverns in which she wandered with Percinet. But when she woke up again, her first thought was that, delightful as this fairy palace seemed to her, yet she could not stay in it, but must go back to her father. When she had been dressed by the 24 maidens in a charming robe which the Queen had sent for her, and in which she looked prettier than ever, Prince Percinet came to see her, and was bitterly disappointed when she told him what she had been thinking. He begged her to consider again how unhappy the wicked Queen would make her, and how, if she would but marry him, all the fairy palace would be hers, and his one thought would be to please her. But, in spite of everything he could say, the princess was quite determined to go back, though he at last persuaded her to stay 8 days, which were so full of pleasure and amusement that they passed like a few hours. On the last day, Graciosa, who had often felt anxious to know what was going on in her father's palace, said to Percinet that she was sure that he could find out for her, if he would, what reason the Queen had given her father for her sudden disappearance. Percinet at first offered to send his courier to find out, but the princess said, "Oh, isn't there a quicker way of knowing than that?" "Very well," said Percinet, "you shall see for yourself." So up they went together to the top of a very high tower, which, like the rest of the castle, was built entirely of rock crystal. There the prince held Graciosa's hand in his, and made her put the tip of her little finger into her mouth, and look towards the town, and immediately she saw the wicked Queen go to the king, and heard her say to him, That miserable princess is dead, and no great loss either. I have ordered that she shall be buried at once." And then the princess saw how she dressed up a log of wood and had it buried, and how the old king cried, and all the people murmured that the queen had killed Graciosa with her cruelties, and that she ought to have her head cut off. When the princess saw that the king was so sorry for her pretended death that he could neither eat nor drink, she cried, "Ah, Percinet! Take me back quickly if you love me." And so, though he did not want to at all, he was obliged to promise that he would let her go. "You may not regret me, princess," he said sadly, "for I fear that you do not love me well enough. But I foresee that you will more than once regret that you left this fairy palace where we have been so happy." But, in spite of all he could say, she bade farewell to the queen, his mother, and prepared to set out. So Percinet, very unwillingly, brought the little sledge with the stags, and she mounted beside him. But they had hardly gone 20 yards when a tremendous noise behind her made Graciosa look back, and she saw the palace of crystal fly into 1,000,000 splinters, like the spray of a fountain, and vanish. "Oh, Percinet," she cried, "what has happened? The palace is gone." "Yes," he answered, "my palace is a thing of the past. You will see it again, but not until after you have been buried." "Now you are angry with me," said Graciosa in her most coaxing voice, "though after all I am more to be pitied than you are." When they got near the palace, the prince made the sledge and themselves invisible, so the princess got in unobserved, and ran up to the great hall where the king was sitting all by himself. At first he was very much startled by Graciosa's sudden appearance, but she told him how the queen had left her out in the forest, and how she had caused a log of wood to be buried. The king, who did not know what to think, sent quickly and had it dug up, and sure enough it was as the princess had said. Then he caressed Graciosa and made her sit down to supper with him, and they were as happy as possible. But someone had by this time told the wicked queen that Graciosa had come back, and was at supper with the king, and in she flew in a terrible fury. The poor old king quite trembled before her, and when she declared that Graciosa was not the princess at all, but a wicked impostor, and that if the king did not give her up at once, she would go back to her own castle and never see him again, he had not a word to say, and really seemed to believe that it was not Graciosa after all. So the queen in great triumph sent for her waiting women, who dragged the unhappy princess away and shut her up in a garret. They took away all her jewels and her pretty dress, and gave her a rough cotton frock, wooden shoes, and a little cloth cap. There was some straw in a corner, which was all she had for a bed, and they gave her a very little bit of black bread to eat. In this miserable plight, Graciosa did indeed regret the fairy palace, and she would have called Percinet to her aid, only she felt sure he was still vexed with her for leaving him, and thought that she could not expect him to come. Meanwhile, the queen had sent for an old fairy, as malicious as herself, and said to her, "You must find me some task for this fine princess which she cannot possibly do, for I mean to punish her. And if she does not do what I order, she will not be able to say that I am unjust." So the old fairy said she would think it over, and come again the next day. When she returned, she brought with her a skein of thread, 3 times as big as herself. It was so fine that a breath of air would break it, and so tangled that it was impossible to see the beginning or the end of it. The queen sent for Graciosa, and said to her, "Do you see this skein? Set your clumsy fingers to work upon it, for I must have it disentangled by sunset. And if you break a single thread, it will be the worse for you." So saying, she left her, locking the door behind her with 3 keys. The princess stood dismayed at the sight of the terrible skein. If she did but turn it over to see where to begin, she broke 1,000 threads, and not one could she disentangle. At last she threw it into the middle of the floor, crying, "Oh, Percinet, this fatal skein will be the death of me if you will not forgive me and help me once more." And immediately in came Percinet as easily as if he had all the keys in his own possession. "Here I am, princess, as much as ever at your service," said he, "though really you are not very kind to me." Then he just stroked the skein with his wand, and all the broken threads joined themselves together, and the whole skein wound itself smoothly off in the most surprising manner. And the prince, turning to Graciosa, asked if there was nothing else that she wished him to do for her, and if the time would never come when she would wish for him for his own sake. "Don't be vexed with me, Percinet," she said. "I am unhappy enough without that." "But why should you be unhappy, my princess?" cried he. "Only come with me, and we shall be as happy as the day is long together." "But suppose you get tired of me," said Graciosa. The prince was so grieved at this want of confidence that he left her without another word. The wicked queen was in such a hurry to punish Graciosa that she thought the sun would never set. And indeed it was before the appointed time that she came with her 4 fairies, and as she fitted the 3 keys into the locks, she said, "I'll venture to say that the idle minx has not done anything at all. She prefers to sit with her hands before her to keep them white." But as soon as she entered, Graciosa presented her with the ball of thread in perfect order, so that she had no fault to find, and could only pretend to discover that it was soiled, for which imaginary fault she gave Graciosa a blow on each cheek. That made her white and pink skin turn green and yellow. And then she sent her back to be locked into the garret once more. Then the queen sent for the fairy again and scolded her furiously. "Don't make such a mistake again. Find me something that it would be quite impossible for her to do," she said. So the next day the fairy appeared with a huge barrel full of the feathers of all sorts of birds. There were nightingales, canaries, goldfinches, linnets, tomtits, parrots, owls, sparrows, doves, ostriches, bustards, peacocks, larks, partridges, and everything else that you can think of. These feathers were all mixed up in such confusion that the birds themselves could not have chosen out their own. "Here," said the fairy, "is a little task which it will take all your prisoner's skill and patience to accomplish. Tell her to pick out and lay in a separate heap the feathers of each bird. She would need to be a fairy to do it." The queen was more than delighted at the thought of the despair this task would cause the princess. She sent for her, and with the same threats as before, locked her up with the 3 keys, ordering that all the feathers should be sorted by sunset. Graciosa set to work at once, but before she had taken out 12 feathers, she found that it was perfectly impossible to know one from another. "Ah, well," she sighed, "the queen wishes to kill me, and if I must die, I must. I cannot ask Percinet to help me again, for if he really loved me, he would not wait till I called him. He would come without that." "I am here, my Graciosa," cried Percinet, springing out of the barrel where he had been hiding. "How can you still doubt that I love you with all my heart?" Then he gave 3 strokes of his wand upon the barrel, and all the feathers flew out in a cloud and settled down in neat little separate heaps all round the room. "What should I do without you, Percinet?" said Graciosa gratefully. But still she could not quite make up her mind to go with him and leave her father's kingdom forever. So she begged him to give her more time to think of it, and he had to go away disappointed once more. When the wicked queen came at sunset, she was amazed and infuriated to find the task done. However, she complained that the heaps of feathers were badly arranged, and for that the princess was beaten and sent back to her garret. Then the queen sent for the fairy once more and scolded her until she was fairly terrified, and promised to go home and think of another task for Graciosa worse than either of the others. At the end of 3 days she came again, bringing with her a box. "Tell your slave," said he, "to carry this wherever you please, but on no account to open it. She will not be able to help doing so, and then you will be quite satisfied with the result." So the queen came to Graciosa and said, "Carry this box to my castle, and place it upon the table in my own room. But I forbid you on pain of death to look at what it contains." Graciosa set out, wearing her little cap and wooden shoes and the old cotton frock, but even in this disguise she was so beautiful that all the passers-by wondered who she could be. She had not gone far before the heat of the sun and the weight of the box tired her so much that she sat down to rest in the shade of a little wood which lay on one side of a green meadow. She was carefully holding the box upon her lap when she suddenly felt the greatest desire to open it. "What could possibly happen if I did?" she said to herself. "I should not take anything out. I should only just see what was there." And without further hesitation, she lifted the cover. Instantly out came swarms of little men and women, no taller than her finger, and scattered themselves all over the meadow, singing and dancing and playing the merriest games, so that at first Graciosa was delighted and watched them with much amusement. But presently, when she was rested and wished to go on her way, she found that, do what she would, she could not get them back into their box. If she chased them in the meadow, they fled into the wood, and if she pursued them into the wood, they dodged round trees and behind sprigs of moss, and with peals of elfin laughter scampered back again into the meadow. At last, weary and terrified, she sat down and cried. "It is my own fault," she said sadly. "Percinet, if you can still care for such an imprudent princess, do come and help me once more." Immediately Percinet stood before her. "Ah, princess," he said, "but for the wicked queen, I fear you would never think of me at all." "Indeed I should," said Graciosa. "I am not so ungrateful as you think. Only wait a little, and I believe I shall love you quite dearly." Percinet was pleased at this, and with one stroke of his wand compelled all the wilful little people to come back to their places in the box. And then, rendering the princess invisible, he took her with him in his chariot to the castle. When the princess presented herself at the door, and said that the queen had ordered her to place the box in her own room, the governor laughed heartily at the idea. "No, no, my little shepherdess," said he, "that is not the place for you. No wooden shoes have ever been over that floor yet." Then Graciosa begged him to give her a written message telling the queen that he had refused to admit her. This he did, and she went back to Percinet, who was waiting for her, and they set out together for the palace. You may imagine that they did not go the shortest way, but the princess did not find it too long, and before they parted, she had promised that if the queen was still cruel to her, and tried again to play her any spiteful trick, she would leave her and come to Percinet forever. When the queen saw her returning, she fell upon the fairy, whom she had kept with her, and pulled her hair, and scratched her face, and would really have killed her if a fairy could be killed. And when the princess presented the letter and the box, she threw them both upon the fire without opening them, and looked very much as if she would like to throw the princess after them. However, what she really did do was to have a great hole as deep as a well dug in her garden, and the top of it covered with a flat stone. Then she went and walked near it, and said to Graciosa and all her ladies who were with her, "I am told that a great treasure lies under that stone. Let us see if we can lift it." So they all began to push and pull at it, and Graciosa among the others, which was just what the queen wanted. For as soon as the stone was lifted high enough, she gave the princess a push which sent her down to the bottom of the well. And then the stone was let fall again, and there she was, a prisoner. Graciosa felt that now indeed she was hopelessly lost. Surely not even Percinet could find her in the heart of the earth. "This is like being buried alive," she said with a shudder. "Oh, Percinet, if you only knew how I am suffering from my want of trust in you. But how could I be sure that you would not be like other men, and tire of me from the moment you were sure I loved you?" As she spoke, she suddenly saw a little door open, and the sunshine blazed into the dismal well. Graciosa did not hesitate an instant, but passed through into a charming garden. Flowers and fruit grew on every side. Fountains plashed, and birds sang in the branches overhead. And when she reached a great avenue of trees and looked up to see where it would lead her, she found herself close to the Palace of Crystal. Yes, there was no mistaking it, and the queen and Percinet were coming to meet her. "Ah, princess," said the queen, "don't keep this poor Percinet in suspense any longer. You little guess the anxiety he has suffered while you were in the power of that miserable queen." The princess kissed her gratefully, and promised to do as she wished in everything, and holding out her hand to Percinet with a smile, she said, "Do you remember telling me that I should not see your palace again until I had been buried? I wonder if you guessed then that, when that happened, I should tell you that I love you with all my heart, and will marry you whenever you like?" Prince Percinet joyfully took the hand that was given him, and, for fear the princess should change her mind, the wedding was held at once with the greatest splendour, and Graciosa and Percinet lived happily ever after. Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack sells the cow. Once upon a time there was a poor widow who lived in a little cottage with her only son Jack. Jack was a giddy, thoughtless boy, but very kind-hearted and affectionate. There had been a hard winter, and after it the poor woman had suffered from fever and ague. Jack did no work as yet, and by degrees they grew dreadfully poor. The widow saw that there was no means of keeping Jack and herself from starvation, but by selling her cow. So one morning she said to her son, "I am too weak to go myself, Jack, so you must take the cow to market for me." "And sell her." Jack liked going to market to sell the cow very much, but as he was on the way, he met a butcher who had some beautiful beans in his hand. Jack stopped to look at them, and the butcher told the boy that they were of great value, and persuaded the silly lad to sell the cow for these beans. When he brought them home to his mother instead of the money she expected for her nice cow, she was very vexed and shed many tears, scolding Jack for his folly. He was very sorry, and mother and son went to bed very sadly that night. Their last hope seemed gone. At daybreak, Jack rose and went out into the garden. "At least," he thought, "I will sow the wonderful beans. Mother says that they are just common scarlet runners and nothing else, but I may as well sow them." So he took a piece of stick and made some holes in the ground, and put in the beans. That day they had very little dinner, and went sadly to bed, knowing that for the next day there would be none, and Jack, unable to sleep from grief and vexation, got up at dawn and went out into the garden. What was his amazement to find that the beans had grown up in the night, and climbed up and up till they covered the high cliff that sheltered the cottage and disappeared above it. The stalks had twined and twisted themselves together till they formed quite a ladder. It would be easy to climb it, thought Jack, and, having thought of the experiment, he at once resolved to carry it out, for Jack was a good climber. However, After his late mistake about the cow, he thought he had better consult his mother first. Wonderful! Growth of the beanstalk. So Jack called his mother, and they both gazed in silent wonder at the beanstalk, which was not only of great height, but was thick enough to bear Jack's weight. "I wonder where it ends," said Jack to his mother. "I think I will climb up and see." His mother wished him not to venture up this strange ladder, but Jack coaxed her to give her consent to the attempt, for he was certain there must be something wonderful in the beanstalk, so at last she yielded to his wishes. Jack instantly began to climb, and went up and up on the ladder-like beam till everything he had left behind him, the cottage, the village, and even the tall church tower, looked quite little, and still he could not see the top of the beanstalk. Jack felt a little tired, and thought for a moment that he would go back again. But he was a very persevering boy, and he knew that the way to succeed in anything is not to give up. So, after resting for a moment, he went on. After climbing higher and higher till he grew afraid to look down for fear he should be giddy, Jack at last reached the top of the beanstalk, and found himself in a beautiful country, finely wooded, with beautiful meadows covered with sheep. A crystal stream ran through the pastures. Not far from the place where he had got off the beanstalk stood a fine, strong castle. Jack wondered very much that he had never heard of or seen this castle before, but when he reflected on the subject, he saw that it was as much separated from the village by the perpendicular rock on which it stood as if it were in another land. While Jack was standing looking at the castle, a very strange-looking woman came out of the wood and advanced towards him. She wore a pointed cap of quilted red satin turned up with ermine. Her hair streamed loose over her shoulders, and she walked with a staff. Jack took off his cap and made her a bow. "If you please, ma'am," said he, "is this your house?" "No," said the old lady. "Listen, and I will tell you the story of that castle. Once upon a time there was a noble knight who lived in this castle, which is on the borders of fairyland. He had a fair and beloved wife and several lovely children, and as his neighbours, the little people, were very friendly towards him, they bestowed on him many excellent and precious gifts. Rumour whispered of these treasures, and a monstrous giant, who lived at no great distance and who was a very wicked being, resolved to obtain possession of them. So he bribed a false servant to let him inside the castle when the knight was in bed and asleep, and he killed him as he lay. Then he went to the part of the castle which was the nursery, and also killed all the poor little ones he found there. Happily for her, the lady was not to be found. She had gone with her infant son, who was only 2 or 3 months old, to visit her old nurse, who lived in the valley, and she had been detained all night there by a storm. The next morning, as soon as it was light, one of the servants at the castle, who had managed to escape, came to tell the poor lady of the sad fate of her husband and her pretty babes. She could scarcely believe him at first, and was eager at once to go back and share the fate of her dear ones, but the old nurse, with many tears, besought her to remember that she had still a child, and that it was her duty to preserve her life for the sake of the poor innocent. The lady yielded to this reasoning, and consented to remain at her nurse's house as the best place of concealment, for the servant told her that the giant had vowed, if he could find her, he would kill both her and her baby. Years rolled on. The old nurse died, leaving her cottage and the few articles of furniture it contained to her poor lady, who dwelt in it, working as a peasant for her daily bread. Her spinning wheel and the milk of a cow, which she had purchased with the little money she had with her, sufficed for the scanty subsistence of herself and her little son. There was a nice little garden attached to the cottage, in which they cultivated peas, beans, and cabbages, and the lady was not ashamed to go out at harvest time, and glean in the fields to supply her little son's wants. Jack, that poor lady is your mother. This castle was once your father's, and must again be yours." Jack uttered a cry of surprise. "My mother! Oh, madam, what ought I to do?" "My poor father! My dear mother! Your duty requires you to win it back for your mother. But the task is a very difficult one, and full of peril, Jack. Have you courage to undertake it?" "I fear nothing when I am doing right," said Jack. "Then," said the lady in the red cap, "you are one of those who slay giants. You must get into the castle, and if possible, possess yourself of a hen that lays golden eggs and a harp that talks. Remember, all the giant possesses is really yours." As she ceased speaking, the lady of the red hat suddenly disappeared, and of course Jack knew she was a fairy. Jack determined at once to attempt the adventure, so he advanced and blew the horn which hung at the castle portal. The door was opened in a minute or two by a frightful giantess, with one great eye in the middle of her forehead. As soon as Jack saw her, he turned to run away, but she caught him and dragged him into the castle. "Ho, ho!" She laughed terribly. "You didn't expect to see me here, that is clear. No, I shan't let you go again. I am weary of my life. I am so overworked, and I don't see why I should not have a page as well as other ladies. And you shall be my boy. You shall clean the knives and black the boots, and make the fires, and help me generally when the giant is out. When he is at home I must hide you, for he has eaten up all my pages hitherto. And you would be a dainty morsel, my little lad." While she spoke, she dragged Jack right into the castle. The poor boy was very much frightened, as I am sure you and I would have been in his place. But he remembered that fear disgraces a man. So he struggled to be brave and make the best of things. "I am quite ready to help you, and do all I can to serve you, madam," he said. "Only I beg you will be good enough to hide me from your husband, for I should not like to be eaten at all." "That's a good boy," said the giantess, nodding her head. "It is lucky for you that you did not scream out when you saw me, as the other boys who have been here did, for if you had done so, my husband would have awakened and have eaten you, as he did them, for breakfast. Come here, child, go into my wardrobe. He never ventures to open that. You will be safe there." And she opened a huge wardrobe which stood in the great hall, and shut him into it. But the keyhole was so large that it admitted plenty of air, and he could see everything that took place through it. By and by he heard a heavy tramp on the stairs, like the lumbering along of a great cannon, and then a voice like thunder cried out, "Fee, fee, fee, foo, foom. I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive or let him be dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Wife," cried the giant, "there is a man in the castle. Let me have him for breakfast." "You are grown old and stupid," cried the lady in her loud tones. "It is only a nice fresh steak off an elephant that I have cooked for you, which you smell. There, sit down and make a good breakfast." And she placed a huge dish before him of savoury steaming meat, which greatly pleased him, and made him forget his idea of an Englishman being in the castle. When he had breakfasted, he went out for a walk, and then the giantess opened the door and made Jack come out to help her. He helped her all day. She fed him well, and when evening came, put him back in the wardrobe. The hen that lays golden eggs. The giant came into supper. Jack watched him through the keyhole, and was amazed to see him pick a wolf's bone, and put half a fowl at a time into his capacious mouth. When the supper was ended, he bade his wife bring him his hen that laid the golden eggs. "It lays as well as it did when it belonged to that paltry knight," he said. "Indeed, I think the eggs are heavier than ever." The giantess went away, and soon returned with a little brown hen, which she placed on the table before her husband. "And now, my dear," she said, "I am going for a walk, if you don't want me any longer." "Go," said the giant. "I shall be glad to have a nap by and by." Then he took up the brown hen and said to her, "Lay!" And she instantly laid a golden egg. "Lay!" said the giant again. And she laid another. "Lay!" he repeated the third time. And again a golden egg lay on the table. Now Jack was sure this hen was that of which the fairy had spoken. By and by the giant put the hen down on the floor, and soon after went fast asleep, snoring so loud that it sounded like thunder. Directly Jack perceived that the giant was fast asleep, he pushed open the door of the wardrobe and crept out. Very softly he stole across the room, and, picking up the hen, made haste to quit the apartment. He knew the way to the kitchen, the door of which he found was left ajar. He opened it, shut and locked it after him, and flew back to the beanstalk, which he descended as fast as his feet would move. When his mother saw him enter the house, she wept for joy, for she had feared that the fairies had carried him away, or that the giant had found him. But Jack put the brown hen down before her, and told her how he had been in the giant's castle, and all his adventures. She was very glad to see the hen, which would make them rich once more. The money bags! Jack made another journey up the beanstalk to the giant's castle one day while his mother had gone to market. But first he dyed his hair and disguised himself. The old woman did not know him again, and dragged him in as she had done before to help her to do the work. But she heard her husband coming, and hid him in the wardrobe, not thinking that it was the same boy who had stolen the hen. She bade him stay quite still there, or the giant would eat him. Then the giant came in, saying, "Fe, fe, 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 fum. I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive, or let him be dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Nonsense," said the wife. "It is only a roasted bullock that I thought would be a titbit for your supper. Sit down, and I will bring it up at once." The giant sat down, and soon his wife brought up a roasted bullock on a large dish, and they began their supper. Jack was amazed to see them pick the bones of the bullock as if it had been a lark. As soon as they had finished their meal, the giantess rose and said, "Now, my dear, with your leave, I am going up to my room to finish the story I am reading. If you want me, call for me." "First," answered the giant, "bring me my money bags, that I may count my golden pieces before I sleep." The giantess obeyed. She went, and soon returned with 2 large bags over her shoulders, which she put down by her husband. "There," she said, "that is all that is left of the night's money. When you have spent it, you must go and take another baron's castle." "That he shan't, if I can help it," thought Jack. The giant, when his wife was gone, took out heaps and heaps of golden pieces, and counted them, and put them in piles, till he was tired of the amusement. Then he swept them all back into their bags, and leaning back in his chair, fell fast asleep, snoring so loud that no other sound was audible. Jack stole softly out of the wardrobe, and taking up the bags of money, which were his very own, because the giant had stolen them from his father, he ran off, and with great difficulty descending the beanstalk, laid the bags of gold on his mother's table. She had just returned from town, and was crying at not finding Jack. "There, mother, I have brought you the gold that my father lost." "Oh, Jack, you are a very good boy, but I wish you would not risk your precious life in the giant's castle. Tell me how you came to go there again." And Jack told her all about it. Jack's mother was very glad to get the money, but she did not like him to run any risk for her. But after a time, Jack made up his mind to go again to the giant's castle. The Talking Harp. So he climbed the beanstalk once more and blew the horn at the giant's gate. The giantess soon opened the door. She was very stupid and did not know him again. But she stopped a minute before she took him in. She feared another robbery, but Jack's fresh face looked so innocent that she could not resist him. And so she bade him come in, and again hid him away in the wardrobe. By and by the giant came home, and as soon as he had crossed the threshold he roared out, "Fay, fay, 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 foe. I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive, or let him be dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "You stupid old giant," said his wife, "you only smell a nice sheep, which I have grilled for your dinner." And the giant sat down, and his wife brought up a whole sheep for his dinner. When he had eaten it all up, he said, "Now bring me my harp, and I will have a little music while you take your walk." The giantess obeyed, and returned with a beautiful harp. The framework was all sparkling with diamonds and rubies, and the strings were all of gold. "This is one of the nicest things I took from the knight," said the giant. "I am very fond of music, and my harp is a faithful servant." So he drew the harp towards him and said, "Play." And the harp played a very soft, sad air. "Play something merrier," said the giant. And the harp played a merry tune. "Now play me a lullaby," roared the giant, and the harp played a sweet lullaby, to the sound of which its master fell asleep. Then Jack stole softly out of the wardrobe and went into the huge kitchen to see if the giantess had gone out. He found no one there, so he went to the door and opened it softly, for he thought he could not do so with the harp in his hand. Then he entered the giant's room and seized the harp and ran away with it. But as he jumped over the threshold, the harp called out, "Master! Master!" And the giant woke up. With a tremendous roar, he sprang from his seat and in 2 strides had reached the door. But Jack was very nimble. He fled like lightning with the harp, talking to it as he went, for he saw it was a fairy, and telling it he was the son of its old master, the knight. Still the giant came on so fast that he was quite close to poor Jack, and had stretched out his great hand to catch him. But, luckily, just at that moment he stepped upon a loose stone, stumbled, and fell flat on the ground, where he lay at his full length. This accident gave Jack time to get on the beanstalk and hasten down it, but just as he reached their own garden, he beheld the giant descending after him. "Mother, mother," cried Jack, "make haste and give me the axe." His mother ran to him with a hatchet in her hand, and Jack, with one tremendous blow, cut through all the beanstalks except one. "Now, mother, stand out of the way," said he. The giant breaks his neck. Jack's mother shrank back, and it was well she did so, for just as the giant took hold of the last branch of the beanstalk, Jack cut the stem quite through and darted from the spot. Down came the giant with a terrible crash, and as he fell on his head, he broke his neck and lay dead at the feet of the woman he had so much injured. Before Jack and his mother had recovered from their alarm and agitation, a beautiful lady stood before them. "Jack," said she, "you have acted like a brave knight's son, and deserve to have your inheritance restored to you. Dig a grave and bury the giant, and then go and kill the giantess." "But," said Jack, "I could not kill anyone unless I were fighting with him, and I could not draw my sword upon a woman. Moreover, the giantess was very kind to me." The fairy smiled on Jack. "I am very much pleased with your generous feeling," she said. "Nevertheless, return to the castle and act as you will find needful." Jack asked the fairy if she would show him the way to the castle, as the beanstalk was now down. She told him that she would drive him there in her chariot, which was drawn by 2 peacocks. Jack thanked her, and sat down in the chariot with her. The fairy drove him a long distance round, till they reached a village which lay at the bottom of the hill. Here they found a number of miserable-looking men assembled. The fairy stopped her carriage and addressed them. "My friends," said she, "the cruel giant who oppressed you and ate up all your flocks and herds is dead, and this young gentleman was the means of your being delivered from him, and is the son of your kind old master, the knight." The men gave a loud cheer at these words, and pressed forward to say that they would serve Jack as faithfully as they had served his father. The fairy bade them follow her to the castle, and they marched thither in a body, and Jack blew the horn and demanded admittance. The old giantess saw them coming from the turret loophole. She was very much frightened, for she guessed that something had happened to her husband, and as she came downstairs very fast, she caught her foot in her dress, and fell from the top to the bottom and broke her neck. When the people outside found that the door was not open to them, they took crowbars and forced the portal. Nobody was to be seen, but on leaving the hall they found the body of the giantess at the foot of the stairs. Thus Jack took possession of the castle. The fairy went and brought his mother to him with the hen and the harp. He had the giantess buried, and endeavoured as much as lay in his power to do right to those whom the giant had robbed. Before her departure for Fairyland, the fairy explained to Jack that she had sent the butcher to meet him with the beans, in order to try what sort of lad he was. If you had looked at the gigantic beanstalk and only stupidly wondered about it, she said, I should have left you where misfortune had placed you, only restoring her cow to your mother. But you showed an inquiring mind, and great courage and enterprise, therefore you deserve to rise, and when you mounted the beanstalk, you climbed the ladder of fortune. She then took her leave of Jack and his mother. Carrie Woodengown. There was once upon a time a king who had become a widower. His queen had left one daughter behind her, and she was so wise and so pretty that it was impossible for anyone to be wiser or prettier. For a long time the king went sorrowing for his wife, for he had loved her exceedingly. But at last he grew tired of living alone, and married a queen who was a widow, and she also had a daughter, who was just as ill-favoured and wicked as the other was good and beautiful. The stepmother and her daughter were envious of the king's daughter because she was so pretty. But so long as the king was at home, they dared do her no harm, because his love for her was so great. Then there came a time when he made war on another king and went away to fight, and then the new queen thought that she could do what she liked. So she both hungered and beat the king's daughter and chased her about into every corner. At last she thought that everything was too good for her, and set her to work to look after the cattle. So she went about with the cattle and herded them in the woods and in the fields. Of food she got little or none, and grew pale and thin, and was nearly always weeping and sad. Among the herd there was a great blue bull, which always kept itself very smart and sleek, and often came to the king's daughter and let her stroke him. So one day, when she was again sitting crying and sorrowing, the bull came up to her and asked why she was always so full of care. She made no answer, but continued to weep. "Well," said the bull, "I know what it is, though you will not tell me. You are weeping because the queen is unkind to you, and because she wants to starve you to death. But you need be under no concern about food, for in my left ear there lies a cloth, and if you will but take it and spread it out, you can have as many dishes as you like." So she did this, and took the cloth and spread it out upon the grass, and then it was covered with the daintiest dishes that anyone could desire, and there was wine and mead and cake. And now she became brisk and well again, and grew so rosy and plump and fair that the queen and her scraggy daughter turned blue and white with vexation at it. The queen could not imagine how her stepdaughter could look so well on such bad food, so she ordered one of her handmaidens to follow her into the wood and watch her, and see how it was, for she thought that some of the servants must be giving her food. So the maid followed her into the wood and watched, and saw how the stepdaughter took the cloth out of the blue bull's ear and spread it out, and how the cloth was then covered with the most delicate dishes, which the stepdaughter ate and regaled herself with. So the waiting maid went home and told the queen. And now the king came home, and he had conquered the other king with whom he had been at war. So there was great gladness in the palace, but no one was more glad than the king's daughter. The queen, however, pretended to be ill, and gave the doctor much money to say that she would never be well again unless she had some of the flesh of the blue bull to eat. Both the king's daughter and the people in the palace asked the doctor if there were no other means of saving her, and begged for the bull's life, for they were all fond of him, and they all declared that there was no such bull in the whole country. But it was all in vain. He was to be killed, and should be killed, and nothing else would serve. When the king's daughter heard it, she was full of sorrow, and went down to the byre to the bull. He too was standing there, hanging his head, and looking so downcast that she fell a-weeping over him. "What are you weeping for?" said the bull. So she told him that the king had come home again, and that the queen had pretended to be ill, and that she had made the doctor say that she could never be well again unless some of the flesh of the blue bull was given her to eat, and that now he was to be killed. "When once they have taken my life, they will soon kill you also," said the bull. "If you are of the same mind with me, we will take our departure this very night." The king's daughter thought that it was bad to go and leave her father, but that it was worse still to be in the same house with the queen, so she promised the bull that she would come. At night, when all the others had gone to bed, the king's daughter stole softly down to the byre to the bull, and he took her on his back and got out of the courtyard as quickly as he could. So, at cock-crow next morning, when the people came to kill the bull, he was gone, and when the king got up and asked for his daughter, she was gone too. He sent forth messengers to all parts of the kingdom to search for them, and published his loss in all the parish churches, but there was no one who had seen anything of them. In the meantime, the bull travelled through many lands with the king's daughter on his back, and one day they came to a great copper wood, where the trees and the branches and the leaves and the flowers and everything else was of copper. But before they entered the wood, the bull said to the king's daughter, "When we enter into this wood, you must take the greatest care not to touch a leaf of it, or all will be over both with me and with you. For a troll with 3 heads, who is the owner of the wood, lives here." So she said she would be on her guard and not touch anything. And she was very careful, and bent herself out of the way of the branches, and put them aside with her hands. But it was so thickly wooded that it was all but impossible to get forward, and do what she might, she somehow or other tore off a leaf which got into her hand. "Oh, oh, what have you done now?" said the bull. "It will now cost us a battle for life or death, but do be careful to keep the leaf." Very soon afterwards they came to the end of the wood, and the troll with 3 heads came rushing up to them. "Who is that? Who is touching my wood?" said the troll. "The wood is just as much mine as yours," said the bull. "We shall have a tussle for that," shrieked the troll. "That may be," said the bull. So they rushed on each other and fought. And as for the bull, he butted and kicked with all the strength of his body. But the troll fought quite as well as he did, and the whole day went by before the bull put an end to him, And then he himself was so full of wounds and so worn out that he was scarcely able to move. So they had to wait a day. And the bull told the king's daughter to take the horn of ointment which hung at the troll's belt and rub him with it. Then he was himself again. And the next day they set off once more. And now they journeyed on for many, many days. And then after a long, long time they came to a silver wood. The trees and the boughs and the leaves and the flowers and everything else was of silver. Before the bull went into the wood, he said to the king's daughter, "When we enter into this wood, you must, for heaven's sake, be very careful not to touch anything at all, and not to pluck off even so much as one leaf, or else all will be over both with you and with me. A troll with 6 heads lives here, who is the owner of the wood, and I do not think I should be able to overcome him." "Yes," said the king's daughter, "I will take good care not to touch what you do not wish me to touch." But when they got into the wood, it was so crowded, and the trees so close together, that they could scarcely get forward. She was as careful as she could be, and bent aside to get out of the way of the branches, and thrust them away from before her with her hands. But every instant a branch struck against her eyes, and in spite of all her care, she happened to pull off one leaf. "Oh, oh, what have you done now?" said the bull. "It will now cost us a battle for life or death, for this troll has 6 heads and is twice as strong as the other, but do be careful to keep the leaf." Just as he said this came the troll. "Who is that who is touching my wood?" he said. "It is just as much mine as yours." "We shall have a tussle for that," screamed the troll. "That may be," said the bull, and rushed at the troll, and gored out his eyes, and drove his horns right through him, so that his entrails gushed out. But the troll fought just as well as he did, and it was 3 whole days before the bull got the life out of him. But the bull was then so weak and worn out that it was only with pain and effort that he could move, and so covered with wounds that the blood streamed from him. So he told the king's daughter to take the horn of ointment that was hanging at the troll's belt and anoint him with it. She did this, and then he came to himself again, but they had to stay there and rest for a week before the bull was able to go any farther. At last they set forth on their way again, but the bull was still weak and at first could not go quickly. The king's daughter wished to spare him, and said that she was so young and light of foot that she would willingly walk, but he would not give her leave to do that, and she was forced to seat herself on his back again. So they travelled for a long time, and through many lands, and the king's daughter did not at all know where he was taking her, but after a long, long time they came to a gold wood. It was so golden that the gold dripped off it, and the trees and the branches and the flowers and the leaves were all of pure gold. Here all happened just as it had happened in the copper wood and silver wood. The bull told the king's daughter that on no account was she to touch it, for there was a troll with 9 heads who was the owner, and that he was much larger and stronger than both the others put together, and that he did not believe that he could overcome him. So she said that she would take great care not to touch anything, and he should see that she did. But when they got into the wood, it was still thicker than the silver wood, and the farther they got into it, the worse it grew. The wood became thicker and thicker, and closer and closer, and at last she thought there was no way whatsoever by which they could get forward. She was so terrified lest she should break anything off, that she sat and twisted and turned herself on this side and on that to get out of the way of the branches, and pushed them away from her with her hands. But every moment they struck against her eyes, so that she could not see what she was clutching at. And before she knew what she was doing, she had a golden apple in her hands. She was now in such terror that she began to cry and wanted to throw it away. But the bull said that she was to keep it and take the greatest care of it, and comforted her as well as he could. But he believed that it would be a hard struggle, and he doubted whether it would go well with him. Just then the troll with 9 heads came, and he was so frightful that the king's daughter scarcely dared to look at him. "Who is this who is breaking my wood?" he screamed. "It is as much mine as yours," said the bull. "We shall have a tussle for that," screamed the troll. "That may be," said the bull. So they rushed at each other and fought. And it was such a dreadful sight that the king's daughter very nearly swooned. The bull gored the troll's eyes out and ran his horns right through him. But the troll fought as well as he did. And when the bull had gored one head to death, the other heads breathed life into it again. So it was a whole week before the bull was able to kill him. But then he himself was so worn out and weak that he could not move at all. His body was all one wound, and he could not even so much as tell the king's daughter to take the horn of ointment out of the troll's belt and rub him with it. She did this without being told, so he came to himself again. But he had to lie there for 3 weeks and rest before he was in a state to move. Then they journeyed onwards by degrees, for the bull said that they had still a little farther to go, and in this way they crossed many high hills and thick woods. This lasted for a while, and then they came upon the fells. "Do you see anything?" asked the bull. "No, I see nothing but the sky above and the wild fell side," said the king's daughter. Then they climbed up higher, and the fell grew more level, so that they could see farther around them. "Do you see anything now?" said the bull. "Yes, I see a small castle far, far away," said the princess. "It is not so very little after all," said the bull. After a long, long time, they came to a high hill, where there was a precipitous wall of rock. "Do you see nothing now?" said the bull. "Yes, now I see the castle quite near, and now it is much, much larger," said the king's daughter. "Thither shall you go," said the bull. "Immediately below the castle there is a pigsty where you shall dwell. When you get there, you will find a wooden gown which you are to put on, and then go to the castle and say that you are called Carrie Woodengown, and that you are seeking a place. But now you must take out your little knife and cut off my head with it, and then you must flay me and roll up my hide and put it there under the rock. And beneath the hide you must lay the copper leaf and the silver leaf and the golden apple. Close beside the rock a stick is standing, and when you want me for anything you have only to knock at the wall of rock with that." At first she would not do it, but when the bull said that this was the only reward that he would have for what he had done for her, she could do no otherwise. So though she thought it very cruel, she slaved on and cut at the great animal with the knife till she had cut off his head and hide. And then she folded up the hide and laid it beneath the mountain wall, and put the copper leaf and the silver leaf and the golden apple inside it. When she had done that, she went away to the pigsty, but all the way as she went she wept and was very sorrowful. Then she put on the wooden gown and walked to the king's palace. When she got there, she went into the kitchen and begged for a place, saying that her name was Carrie Woodengown. The cook told her that she might have a place and leave to stay there at once and wash up, for the girl who had done that before had just gone away. "And as soon as you get tired of being here, you will take yourself off too," said he. "No," said she, "that I shall certainly not." And then she washed up, and did it very tidily. On Sunday some strangers were coming to the king's palace, so Carrie begged to have leave to carry up the water for the prince's bath. But the others laughed at her and said, "What do you want there? Do you think the prince will ever look at such a fright as you?" She would not give it up, however, but went on begging until at last she got leave. When she was going upstairs, her wooden gown made such a clatter that the prince came out and said, "What sort of a creature may you be?" "I was to take this water to you," said Carrie. "Do you suppose that I will have any water that you bring?" said the prince, and emptied it over her. She had to bear that, but then she asked permission to go to church. She got that, for the church was very near. But first she went to the rock and knocked at it with the stick which was standing there, as the bull had told her to do. Instantly a man came forth and asked what she wanted. The king's daughter said that she had got leave to go to church and listen to the priest, but that she had no clothes to go in. So he brought her a gown that was as bright as the copper wood, and she got a horse and saddle too from him. When she reached the church, she was so pretty and so splendidly dressed that everyone wondered who she could be, and hardly anyone listened to what the priest was saying, for they were all looking far too much at her, and the prince himself liked her so well that he could not take his eyes off her for an instant. As she was walking out of church, the prince followed her and shut the church door after her, and thus he kept one of her gloves in his hand. Then she went away and mounted her horse again. The prince again followed her and asked her whence she came. "Oh, I am from Bathland," said Carrie. And when the prince took out the glove and wanted to give it back to her, she said, "Darkness behind me, but light on my way, that the prince may not see where I'm going today." The prince had never seen the equal of that glove, and he went far and wide, asking after the country which the proud lady who rode away without her glove had said that she came from, but there was no one who could tell him where it lay. Next Sunday, someone had to take up a towel to the prince. "Ah, may I have leave to go up with that?" said Carrie. "What would be the use of that?" said the others who were in the kitchen. "You saw what happened last time." Carrie would not give in, but went on begging for leave till she got it, and then she ran up the stairs so that her wooden gown clattered again. Out came the prince, and when he saw that it was Carrie, he snatched the towel from her and flung it right in her eyes. "Be off at once, you ugly troll," said he. "Do you think that I will have a towel that has been touched by your dirty fingers?" After that the prince went to church, and Carrie also asked leave to go. They all asked how she could want to go to church when she had nothing to wear but that wooden gown, which was so black and hideous. But Carrie said she thought the priest was such a good man at preaching that she got so much benefit from what he said, and at last she got leave. She went to the rock and knocked, whereupon out came the man and gave her a gown which was much more magnificent than the first. It was embroidered with silver all over it, and it shone like the silver wood, and he gave her also a most beautiful horse, with housings embroidered with silver, and a bridle of silver too. When the king's daughter got to church, all the people were standing outside upon the hillside, and all of them wondered who on earth she could be. And the prince was on the alert in a moment, and came and wanted to hold her horse while she alighted. But she jumped off and said that there was no need for that, for the horse was so well broken in that it stood still when she bade it, and came when she called it. So they all went into the church together, but there was scarcely anyone who listened to what the priest was saying, for they were all looking far too much at her, and the prince fell much more deeply in love with her than he had been before. When the sermon was over, and she went out of the church, and was just going to mount her horse, the prince again came and asked her where she came from. "I am from Towerland," said the king's daughter, and as she spoke she dropped her riding whip, and while the prince was stooping to pick it up, she said, "Darkness behind me, but light on my way, that the prince may not see where I am going today." And she was gone again, neither could the prince see what had become of her. He went far and wide to inquire for that country from whence she had said that she came, but there was no one who could tell him where it lay. So he was forced to have patience once more. Next Sunday, someone had to go to the prince with a comb. Carrie begged for leave to go with it, but the others reminded her of what had happened last time, and scolded her for wanting to let the prince see her when she was so black and so ugly in her wooden gown. But she would not give up asking until they gave her leave to go up to the prince with the comb. When she went clattering up the stairs again, out came the prince and took the comb and flung it at her and ordered her to be off as fast as she could. After that the prince went to church, and Carrie also begged for leave to go. Again they all asked what she would do there, she who was so black and ugly, and had no clothes that she could be seen in by other people. The prince or someone else might very easily catch sight of her, they said, and then both she and they would suffer for it. But Carrie said that they had something else to do than to look at her, and she never ceased begging until she got leave to go. And now all happened just as it had happened twice already. She went away to the rock and knocked at it with the stick, and then the man came out and gave her a gown which was very much more magnificent than either of the others. It was almost entirely made of pure gold and diamonds, and she also got a noble horse with housings embroidered with gold and a golden bridle. When the king's daughter came to the church, the priest and people were all standing on the hillside waiting for her, and the prince ran up and wanted to hold the horse. But she jumped off, saying, "No, thank you. There is no need. My horse is so well broken in that it will stand still when I bid it." So they all hastened into the church together, and the priest got into the pulpit. But no one listened to what he said, for they were looking far too much at her and wondering whence she came, and the prince was far more in love than he had been on either of the former occasions, and he was mindful of nothing but of looking at her. When the sermon was over, and the king's daughter was about to leave the church, the prince had caused a firkin of tar to be emptied out in the porch in order that he might go to help her over it. She, however, did not trouble herself in the least about the tar, but set her foot down in the middle of it and jumped over it, and thus one of her gold shoes was left sticking in it. When she had seated herself on the horse, the prince came running out of the church and asked her whence she came. "From Combland," said Carrie. But when the prince wanted to reach her gold shoe, she said, "Darkness behind me, but light on my way, that the prince may not see where I'm going today." The prince did not know what had become of her, so he travelled for a long and wearisome time all over the world, asking where Combland was. But when no one could tell him where that country was, he caused it to be made known everywhere that he would marry any woman who could put on the gold shoe. So fair maidens and ugly maidens came thither from all regions, but there was none who had a foot so small that she could put on the gold shoe. After a long, long while came Carrie Woodengown's wicked stepmother with her daughter too, and the shoe fitted her. But she was so ugly and looked so loathsome that the prince was very unwilling to do what he had promised. Nevertheless, all was got ready for the wedding, and she was decked out as a bride. But as they were riding to church, a little bird sat upon a tree and sang, "A slice of her heel, and a slice of her toes. Carrie Woodengown's shoe fills with blood as she goes." And when they looked to it, the bird had spoken the truth, for blood was trickling out of the shoe. So all the waiting maids and all the womenkind in the castle had to come and try on the shoe, but there was not one whom it would fit. "But where is Carrie Woodengown, then?" asked the prince, when all the others had tried on the shoe, for he understood the song of birds, and it came to his mind what the bird had said. "Oh, that creature," said the others. "It's not the least use for her to come here, for she has feet like a horse." "That may be," said the prince, "but as all the others have tried it, Carrie may try it too." "Carrie!" he called out through the door, and Carrie came upstairs, and her wooden gown clattered as if a whole regiment of dragoons were coming up. "Now, you are to try on the gold shoe and be a princess," said the other servants, and they laughed at her and mocked her. Carrie took up the shoe, put her foot into it as easily as possible, and then threw off her wooden gown, and there she stood in the golden gown which flashed like rays of sunshine, and on her other foot she had the fellow to the gold shoe. The prince knew her in a moment, and was so glad that he ran and took her in his arms and kissed her. And when he heard that she was a king's daughter, he was gladder still. And then they had the wedding,